Am I the asshole for refusing to feed my sister's kids for free every day? My older sister, who is 37 years old, has 3 kids under the age of 10. I am 25 years old, don't have kids yet, but I'm a junior sous chef and cook a lot in my spare time. During some recent time off from work, my sister asked if I could babysit her kids after school for 3 days. I said yes, took care of the kids, and she paid me for it. I thought that would be the end of it. After the week was over, she asked me what I had fed the kids and wanted to know how I managed to get them to eat a full meal. Her kids are picky eaters. Typically they'll eat what they like off a plate, such as meat, potatoes, rice, or noodles, and leave the rest, especially the vegetables and sauces. According to my sister and brother-in-law, even if you give them extra vegetables instead of other items, they won't eat them. They'll wait until their next meal, and if you insist they eat the vegetables first, they'll simply skip the meal. I knew about their picky habits before babysitting, so I tried a few techniques to encourage them to eat more balanced meals. On the first day, I blended vegetables and other nutritious ingredients into their dinner without them noticing. On the second day, I served the vegetables in plain sight but prepared them in a way that disguised their appearance. By the last day, I presented the vegetables differently than what they were used to, making them look more appealing, and because the kids recognized them, they ate everything without a fuss. Afterward, my sister tried to get her kids to eat vegetables using my methods, but she couldn't replicate the results, even with the recipes I shared. So she asked if I could make meals for her kids every day. When I asked if she would pay me for the time and money involved, she said I should do it for free as a way to support my nieces and nephews' health. She argued that I had the chance to use my skills for family and make a positive impact. To me, this feels like a big commitment since they expect me to prepare something every single day. My sister thinks I'm being a bad brother and uncle for not agreeing. Am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for getting upset with my boyfriend when he ate the last of my food while I was in the bathroom? My boyfriend, who is 24 years old, and I, also 24, went to a restaurant together for only our second time eating out. This week has been really rough at work, so I asked him to go out for a meal, telling him I needed a pick-me-up. I mentioned that I wasn't super hungry since I had already eaten a bit earlier, but I was really looking forward to having some dumplings and soup. I even talked about how excited I was for the dumplings during the drive to the restaurant. When we ordered, I made it clear that I only wanted 4 dumplings and some soup. My boyfriend ordered 2 large main courses for himself, as he has a bigger appetite. When the food arrived, I shared my soup with him and took a bite of his food, but I was mostly focused on my dumplings. When my dumplings arrived, I ate one before I had to run to the bathroom. When I got back, I saw that he had eaten both of the remaining dumplings. I was really upset because I had been looking forward to those dumplings and only got to eat one. I told him how disappointed I was and called him selfish, saying he never thinks of me. I even asked him to pay for what he ate since I had specifically ordered those dumplings for myself. I don't want to make this a huge deal, but I feel like he should have asked before just taking them, especially since I had clearly expressed how excited I was for them. Am I the asshole for getting upset, calling him selfish, and asking him to pay more? Am I the asshole for planning a Disney trip without my stepdaughter and leaving her with her father? I am a 41-year-old woman and my husband, also 41, and I have 4 children. I have 1 child from a previous relationship, he has 2, and we have 1 together. We have always tried to treat the children as equally as possible. However, when it comes to extended family trips, they don't always go on the same vacations if we're not the ones planning them. For example, his parents will take his children on trips, and my child doesn't usually want to go without me. This has never caused any issues, and when we plan trips, we always bring everyone along. The issue here is with my 16-year-old stepdaughter, who doesn't seem to enjoy anything that the rest of us do. Often, she'll be interested in an activity until someone else shows interest. For example, she wanted to go on a winter trip to Colorado for skiing. None of the other kids were that enthusiastic, but since it's rare to find activities she likes, we planned the trip. She was excited, until the other kids started enjoying it too. Then she wanted to leave. This pattern repeats itself on trips to the zoo, museums, or really any outing. If others show excitement, she instantly dislikes the idea. We thought she might just want individual time with each parent, so we tried that with both her mom and her dad. But she still complained the entire time. Her counselor suggested that she might want activities with both parents together, to show that they get along. They tried that, but if they seemed to enjoy themselves, she immediately disliked whatever they were doing. We've even tried girl days with her mom and me, but she hates those as well. We've found that the less enthusiastic everyone is, the more she wants to participate. This behavior extends to meals too. If someone else likes a dish, she criticizes it. It's as if she can't let anyone else enjoy anything. She also seems to enjoy things more if no one else wants to do them. Her aunt and cousins experience the same behavior when they invite her along. Her sister, however, is not like this at all. We've asked her sister if she has any insights, and their mother has too, but her response is usually, she's just AB H, with a shrug. We have allowed her to choose day trips and even bring a friend, but it's the same issue. If someone likes the activity, she complains and says it was her idea, as if no one else should enjoy it. This year we'd been talking about going to Disney for a while. My nephew has cancer and has always wanted to go with us because he has no siblings and hasn't been able to make many friends due to missing a lot of school. My stepdaughter said Disney was a stupid idea as soon as everyone else showed excitement. My husband also mentioned he would have a lot of work to catch up on when we return since he does seasonal work and needs to take jobs while he can. The kids were enthusiastic about going and he wanted us to go as well, so I made the plans with the idea that we'd go back another year as a full family. I booked the trip for myself, my sister, my nephew, and 3 of our children, deciding my stepdaughter could stay back with her dad since she didn't want to go anyway. My husband says I am the asshole for not including her in the plans, but I don't want her potentially spoiling the trip with complaints, especially with my nephew being there. Am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for not waking up my roommate on the day of his final med school exam? I am a 23-year-old man and my roommate Justin, also 23, and I are med students. We've been roommates for 2 years, living together in a hostel. Last week was our final year exams and it was brutal. We were surviving on just 2 to 3 hours of sleep each day, running on coffee and energy drinks. I know it's not healthy, but there was no other way to get through it, honestly. On the last day of exams, Justin was especially exhausted. Around 1 a.m., he decided to get some sleep and asked me to wake him up at 3 a.m. I agreed. However, by 2:30 a.m. I was completely drained. My brain was shutting down, my notes were becoming blurry, and I knew that if I stayed up any longer I'd probably just pass out. So, I decided to wake Justin up a bit early. I woke Justin up at 2:30 a.m., told him the time, and suggested he set an alarm so he wouldn't oversleep. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, nodded, and said, "All right." I reminded him, "Don't forget to set an alarm," and then almost instantly I fell asleep. We both ended up waking up at 8 a.m. I had set my alarm for 6 a.m., but I kept hitting snooze. Justin panicked, accusing me of not waking him up as I had promised. I reminded him that I did wake him up at 2:30 a.m. and suggested he set an alarm. Justin argued that he was too sleepy to fully understand what was happening and insisted that I should have stayed awake to wake him at 3 a.m. or, at the very least, made sure he was fully alert before going to sleep myself. Justin's exam didn't go well and now he's blaming me. I understand his frustration, but I think he's being unfair. Am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for checking on the baby who was screaming for 15 minutes after I asked my husband to watch him? This happened just about an hour ago and my husband, who is 42 years old, is really angry right now. I had asked him if he could watch the baby, our 3-month-old son, so I could take a shower. He agreed and took the baby right away. I took a few minutes to gather my soap, towel, washcloth, and other shower things in the bathroom. During the entire 15 minutes I was in the bathroom, the baby was crying so hard he was gasping for breath. I was concerned about why he was crying for so long, so I came out of the bathroom and found that my husband had brought the baby's swing into the kitchen and left him there to cry while he cooked dinner on the stove. Our baby's face was red and tears were streaming down his cheeks. I grabbed his pacifier and tried to calm him down a bit, but my husband became irritated, saying I should just go back to the shower instead of fussing over the baby. I then went to the sink to grab a clean bottle, intending to make a bottle and sit down to feed him so he'd stop crying. My husband reacted immediately. He swore at me, grabbed the bottle himself, and started making it. He said I was ruining his plan for the night and that I was taking over. He finished making the bottle, took the baby to the living room and fed him, telling me to just go take my shower. Why didn't he just feed the baby 15 minutes earlier? I went and took my shower, and when I came out, the baby was perfectly happy. My husband was back at the stove and he was even babbling with the baby. His mood seemed fine at this point. I decided it was best to go sit in my room to calm down before talking to him. A few minutes later, he came in and asked why I had closed the door. I told him that I didn't really want to talk to him right now and that he shouldn't swear at me like that again. He became angry, saying that I didn't need to interfere with the baby when he was taking care of him. Our conversation got a little heated, with both our voices raised, though nothing regrettable was said. I ended up going back to the bedroom while he finished cooking. Later, he came into the room, angrily grabbed his pillow and took it to the living room, a clear statement that he wasn't sleeping in the bed with me tonight. After getting the baby to sleep, I picked up his pillow from the couch on my way back to the bedroom. I also sent him a text, basically telling him that he needed to come in and communicate with me about this because I don't think I deserve to be sworn at for checking on a screaming baby. So, am I the asshole for taking over when he hadn't fed the baby? I'm blind. I'm not sure how many steps my staircase has. I've always been blind and that's fine by me. I'm glad I never got to see and then lose my sight. That would have been too depressing. Instead, I don't get to mourn something I've never had. I've lived in this Upper East Side flat for a really long time. As a writer, it's important for me to have my own space. I've been told my writing style is exquisite. Because I cannot see, I focus on the other senses and my writing shines by stimulating them. I don't say a red apple, red has no meaning for me. I say warm, firm and sour, a bit sweet, fits in your hand, smells of grass and childhood. I'm not gonna lie, this flat was nice for a while but really tiny. And I want to learn to play the piano. So, naturally, since I've saved up a lot of money from my works, I bought this beautiful mansion in the suburbs. At least, that's how my friends and family called it. I don't care, I can't see anyway. I just needed to feel the warm sunlight in the kitchen and the crisp air from my balcony, while I drink my coffee in the morning and listen to the birds. And I work day and night. People thought it would be a problem if my house had an upper floor. Because, according to them, even if I've lived my whole life blind, I cook, chop up things, take baths and clean the house, I apparently can't climb some damn stairs. No problem for me. I counted the steps of my staircase. 14. Eventually, I got used to it and I even started going up and down the stairs faster, since I knew exactly how many steps I needed to climb. That's the thing when you're blind. Some movements become reflexes. Since you live alone, you learn how to position certain things and you always find them in the same place. One day, however, I was going down the stairs and I tripped. Where I expected the floor to be, there was this additional step and I didn't think much of it. Figured I must have not paid attention. I mean, yes, it was odd because after 30 years of being blind, tripping wasn't really a common thing. But I didn't look much into it. However, when I went up again, I tripped at the top. That was definitely unusual. Sure as it was one extra step. I went back the stairs and counted. 15. Counted again. 14. The fuck? Sure enough, 14 steps. Whatever. I went to sleep. A few days passed and I didn't trip anymore. I played it off as some error my tired mind made. Then one night as I went downstairs to get a glass of water, I tripped again. This time I really fell down on my foot. That was not a skipped step. There were at least 2 additional steps. I felt around and stood up. My foot hurt a lot but the ankle was good. I couldn't really stand up on it but no serious damage. I went up, carefully counting. 16. What the fuck? Sure, you mess up you count 1 more or 1 less. But 2 more? The house was so still, so silent. No birds, no bees, no cars passing. Normal people fear the darkness, I fear the silence. I went down the stairs again counting. By the time I reached the bottom, I counted 14. Again. I went up again. 18. That was absolutely ridiculous. Was someone messing with me? How could they even mess with me like that? I've never heard of a burglar to break into someone's house and add steps to their stairs. Still, I went to check to see if I locked the door. I can make my way around pretty neat. Went through the kitchen, then into the hallway. And then I bumped into something. I froze. My organs tensed up, my hair stood up, all ears. I had never felt so much fear in my life. Decided to go on and check the door. Yeah, locked. I made my way back upstairs and this time I didn't bump into anything. Or anyone. For fuck's sake. All night, all I did was go up and down like a lunatic. Each time I got different results. Back upstairs, I decided to go down and make one final count. 14. Okay, it is probably going to be more. 15. Nope, still going. 17. 19. 21. That's a record. 27. 33. That could not be possible. 52. 88. I could absolutely feel the sense of impending doom. Something was there with me. And it was vile, disgusting, and unnatural. And this staircase was never ending. 102. I finally gave up. Whatever this was, I didn't want to reach the bottom. I went back up. The moment I turned my back to go up, I tried to be brave, but something got over me and I ran on all fours, desperate to reach the top, desperate to run back to my bedroom. I don't remember how I got inside and locked my door, but I did. And now I'm sitting here and typing. This house is strange. It is eerie and disturbing. And I think if I'd gotten to the bottom of the staircase, I would have left this world. I don't think that was my house anymore. However, no matter what stupid, cryptic, eerie, unnatural staircase I unveiled, It is important not only that I don't go down there but that nothing comes up either. And right now I can hear it creaking.
Peter awoke to the sound of uneven tapping on his bedroom window. In a groggy haze, he rolled over on his side to check the time, letting out a groan. The clock next to his bed read just past midnight. He rolled back over, closing his eyes, hoping that the sound would go away and he could return to sleep. But that wasn't the case. The tapping at his window grew louder and more rapid. Pulling back the covers, Peter reluctantly stepped out of bed to check on the sound. He gently rubbed his arms, surprised by the cold summer night. Still not awake, he stumbled over to the window. Tap, 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 the rhythmic tapping against the window, like some persistent solicitor at the front door. Leaning over, Peter brought his face close to the window. Rubbing at his eyes, he let out a yawn as his brain made sense of what he was seeing through the foggy glass. There was a familiar face, standing right outside his bedroom, tapping at the window with his finger. It took a minute for Peter's brain to catch up, realizing that the shirtless man outside was his father. With his eyes half open, Peter let out another yawn. What normally should have been a confusing sight felt like a surreal dream, and everything always seemed to make sense in his dreams. At least until he awaked. Tap, tap. Tap, his father continued rapping at the window. "What are you doing outside, Dad? It's late." "I know it's late and it's cold out. Let me back inside already." His father's voice seemed soothing and calm despite the furious tapping at the window. "Sure, Dad." Peter stammered out, pushing up on the window frame. The window creaked, holding firmly in place. He looked at the window, confused that somehow it could have bested him. Outside, his father moved his hand up to the middle of the window, continuing his rhythmic tapping at the window lock. "Oh, right," Peter muttered to himself, reaching for the lock. Touching the freezing cold metal latch sent a chill through his spine, shocking him awake. The dreamy atmosphere shattered in an instant. The moment felt wrong. Why was his father outside? Dread crept into the back of his throat. His father had died 3 months ago. Breaking out into a cold sweat, Peter took a step back from the window. "Peter, open the window," the man shouted, losing his calm demeanor, tapping angrily at the window. "No," Peter whispered, taking another step away from the window. The man that looked like his father let out a hideous inhuman sequel as his upper body seized up. His face twisted and contorted into a pained expression. Reeling back from the window, the man threw his head back with a snap. A line formed down the man's neck as his body pulled apart down the middle, revealing a maw of teeth. The creature's entire body vibrated as it let out a high-pitched yelling, running at full speed into the tree line behind Peter's house. Collapsing to the ground, Peter sat in a slump, staring out the window. There would be no more sleeping tonight, or for many more nights to come.
I'm the sole survivor of a roller coaster that couldn't be stopped for 12 hours last year. I learned a lesson I will never forget. Trust your gut. I had the day off from work. I wanted to do something fun, but everyone I knew was busy. Makes sense. I mean, it was a Tuesday. I decided I'd just go to the amusement park by myself. I've done it before and had a great time. I'm a bit of a thrill seeker. Well, not too much anymore. Going 5 miles over the speed limit is about all the excitement I want out of life anymore. I got to the park at around 2 p.m. It was slow, even for a Tuesday. It gave me a sense of excitement because I knew I'd be able to ride a lot of rides without having to be there all day. At the same time, it gave me a weird, uncanny feeling. All this space and not enough people to fill it up. I ignored the feeling and moved on. I don't know about you, but whenever I go to an amusement park, I like to work my way up to the really crazy rides. I'll start small and finish off the day with my favorite. My favorite just happened to be called the Grim Reaper. It feels a little too on the nose, doesn't it? It was 7:30 p.m., and the park closed at 8 p.m. And I knew it was time to get in line for my final ride. I also made a new friend while there. We met standing in line at one of my first rides of the day. We decided after chatting the whole time in line that we'd hang out for the rest of the day. His name was Charlie. We agreed on every ride that day, except for the last. He wanted to end the night on the Mindbinder, but after some convincing, the Mindbinder's line was way shorter while passing by. We decided to do the Grim Reaper last. We got in line for the Grim Reaper and there was hardly anyone in line. It made sense given that it was almost closing time. Do you think they will let us ride multiple times if the line stays down? Charlie said with his hands clasped excitedly in front of him. I just smiled at him and chuckled. Normally I would have been excited too, but something in my gut felt so off. For some reason, I didn't want to go on one of my favorite rides. Maybe it was the 5 corn dogs I ate a couple hours earlier, I figured. I'm a very rational person. I wasn't the kind of person to let anxiety or worry rule over me. I always thought life was just what you made of it. When we got in line, there were about 60 people, give or take. The people in front of us did their ride, and 30 of us were left in line. People started looking at the time and saying they were tired and just getting out of line. By the time it was our turn, only 19 people were in line. I knew the ride well enough to remember that it held 20 people, so if no one else got in line, they really might let us go multiple times. I really didn't want that though. Honestly, I felt even more compelled to get out of line after all those others did too. And I didn't want to seem lame to my new friend if I wanted to get off the coaster after one ride. The time came for us to get on the ride. My heart was pounding faster than it ever had. I wondered if I was all worked up because I watched Final Destination 3 with a friend a couple weeks back. But I wasn't having visions of the terrible fate we would all face. I was just feeling off. I did everything in my power to get it to all make sense and to not worry, but nothing worked. I seriously considered just telling Charlie I didn't feel great after the last ride, but I finally found someone with my taste in roller coasters. I didn't want to let him down. We were towards the back of the line, so we didn't have much say in where we sat. We ended up in the third car from the front. I was just happy we weren't in the front car. As you get on the Grim Reaper, it plays a cheesy little jingle. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, the Grim Reaper will find you dead or alive. With music in the background that always sounded so dumb in the past. I couldn't believe it was getting to me. Charlie even hummed along to it while grabbing my arm with happiness. We got in our seats, and an employee came by and pulled down the metal bar restraint to secure us in our seats. It was the kind that strapped you individually over your shoulder. I'm on the chubbier side, but I can always fit into coaster seats. I've never been told I couldn't go on a ride. I'm just sometimes a little snug. It's actually kind of nice because I feel very secure. As we got strapped in, I felt the plastic-coated metal hit my shoulders and chest. It should have given me a sense of comfort and safety, but I just felt trapped. The employee walked back to the station that has the infamous big button that starts the ride. He flashed all a thumbs up and yelled, "Ready for the Reaper?" Everyone raised their hands and let out an excited scream. Except for me. I let out a large sigh, counting down the seconds, trying to imagine Charlie and I once we were off the ride and how happy we would be. The employee hit the button and we were. The coaster shot out of the loading station like we were a bullet being shot out of a gun. After that, it started on a relatively slow ascent up a point to a drop-off of 60 degrees, a couple of twists and turns, a big loop, and some more twists and turns. About halfway through the ride, I was enjoying myself. I was thinking about how the hard part was done and I was safe. Just a little anxiety was all. We were rounding out our last bend when a sense of relief came over me. I could see the end of the ride. I was almost done. But the ride didn't start to slow down. Normally, the coaster starts to slowly come to a full stop several hundred feet from the end, but it was still going. As we passed by the loading area, I saw the operators look confused as we raced by. I noticed no one else was waiting in line. Someone screamed, "One more time." And everyone on board gave an excited response. Everyone except for me. Charlie looked over at me and grabbed my wrist. Yes. I knew they would let us keep going. This is awesome. He let out an excited yelp as we reached the climb to the drop. He was beaming with joy the whole rest of the lap. We passed by the loading area once again, but this time the coaster operator had a couple other people standing with him. The operator who strapped us looked red and worried. As we were whipped by the employees for our third ride of the day, the other riders were divided. Some were still excited, screaming, "Let's go! One more time!" Or "Best day ever!" Yeah. Some people started to sound scared. Not everyone noticed the employees looking frazzled. I can promise you one thing. I noticed. We started going up the incline again. This was the slowest part of the ride at around 10 miles per hour and slowing down a little as it reached its peak. This gave us opportunities to take a breath or try to talk. Although it was only for a total of about 20 seconds. Are we stuck? I said nervously to Charlie. I'm sure we are fine. There is just a malfunction with the electrical system not activating the brakes or something. There is always a manual. Shut off. He was cut off and we went down the steep hill. We passed by yet again, this time with more people looking worried and someone standing close to where the coaster would go by. He tried to yell at us as we went by, but we couldn't really understand him. Maybe something about them working on getting us off. This time as we zoomed by, everyone was scared and starting to panic. I guess it didn't sink in for some people what was happening until right now. We went around a fifth time and everything remained the same. On the sixth time we were at the peak and saw a fire truck coming into the parking lot. From the top of the incline we had a perfect view of the parking lot, along with the side of a highway a little further out. It took 2 more loops around the track by the time the fire department got to us. Not just them but police officers and ambulances. It started to scare me. Why did they get ambulances? Is it just protocol or is there more to this? Someone came in a few minutes later with a big white board that they used to write messages to us. The ride was too loud when passing by them to hear anything, so this was their only way to talk to us. It must have been the 12th or 13th time around when the whiteboard read, "Trying to free you at peak." I knew they couldn't write a novel for us because you can only read so much while going by so fast, but come on, people, what is that supposed to mean? I think they just wanted to tell us they were working on a way to get us down, but that didn't matter. We had been on this ride for nearly 30 minutes and we felt sick and our bodies hurt like crazy. A couple loops after that, we saw a fire truck trying to get underneath where the top of the ascent was. Luckily, there was a large space where the truck could pull right beside it. Unfortunately, at its peak, it's about 200 feet in the air. It also didn't have any emergency exits at the top, like most coasters do. You'd think that would be a requirement, but what do I know? We saw the fire truck start to expand the ladder that comes out the top, but it wasn't even close. We waited for the firefighters to try and figure out a solution to save us, as the audience below us was watching us like we were some kind of show. It was close to 45 minutes when the first death occurred. Then one more soon after. There was a skinnier guy in a car behind me. I heard him talking about trying to slip out of the seat restraint, which secured him to his seat. The other guy he was with told him it was a bad idea. So did I. The next time we went up the ascent, he began violently wiggling and thrashing back and forth, to the point where people thought he was going to throw off the ride. He managed to wiggle about halfway out, right at the top. But well, it didn't end very well. His leg got caught on a part of the track and yanked the rest of his body out of the bar restraint. It sent his body crashing down towards the earth. However, I think he was dead soon after he was ripped out of his seat. I didn't see too much of it, but the guy who was beside him let out an insane screech. Hearing that kind of agony as you are feeling the harsh effects of gravity hitting on your chest while going down a steep hill was truly mortifying. The screech out of nowhere stopped and more people screamed. The man beside him had a heart attack. I could hear the symphony of moans and crying coming from the crowd watching us. I couldn't hear them before because of how loud the ride was, but they were terrified of what they saw. Police tried to escort them out of the park, but it didn't stop people from parking on the side of the road to watch and record on their phones. It made me feel disgusted. At around an hour on the ride, everyone stopped screaming or trying to talk to each other. It seemed like everyone accepted their fate. My nails were deeply embedded into Charlie's wrist. I couldn't scream anymore due to my throat feeling raw from the yelling. Even if I wanted to, I probably couldn't due to my voice giving out. I saw that I drew a little blood on Charlie, but he was too out of it to notice. He, along with a few other people, were incredibly sick. He threw up probably 5 times by this point and looked cross-eyed. Around that time, the electricity in the whole park shut down. All the lights, everything. I think they were hoping a hard reboot of the whole park would stop the ride. The coaster didn't just rely on gravity but also on a lot of help from motors and other electronic elements. It all turned off when we were on the straightaway. Of course, it still didn't stop. I could hear someone yelling with frustration, not understanding how it could still be moving if it didn't have an electrical source. After 2 hours, they let some family members come into the loading area, which was a terrible idea. We were doing our best to keep cool and stay calm. Our families washing us, zooming by them every 2 minutes and absolutely screaming at us, made it so much worse. My mom was my first family member to show up. Don't get me wrong. I love my mom, but she is very stubborn and wanted something done even though they had already tried everything. Of course, it was just because she wanted me safe, but it was stressing me out. The firefighters put down a safety net underneath the ascent. It was still quite a jump if we could even get out successfully to land on it. And we might be okay, but we were all a little scarred from what happened before. It seemed like they put it out just in case someone tried to get out again. It didn't seem like it was the plan to have us all just jump out of that moving death machine. They weren't desperate enough at that point. We saw a large group of people passionately arguing and yelling at each other. From what I could tell, it was made up of family members, firefighters, and some employees of the park. I'm sure with lots of varying opinions. The ride was on hour 3. When the coaster entered the loading area once again, I saw a woman run over to the control panel. A couple people ran over to her and told her to stop and not press the button. She was screaming her head off and wailing. It had been hard to understand people in the past while going by them, but this was as clear as day. As we passed by, I could tell she was starting to break free from the grip of people holding her back. I wasn't too worried. Whatever button she was wanting to press, I'm sure it wouldn't work since none of the other ones worked so far. We were about 5 seconds away from going down the descent when we heard a click come from all our seats. The woman hit the button that unlocked all our overhead seat belts. Of course, the seatbelt button worked, but not the button to stop the ride. A few people reacted fast enough to either jump out or snap it back over themselves before the ride went down. Others weren't so lucky. 3 people managed to jump out but didn't survive the fall. Despite there now being a giant net to catch anyone who was dumb enough to try and get out that high, one person hit a support beam on the way down, and the other 2 landed wrong when they hit the net. Their bodies folded in an unnatural manner. As they hit, all 3 died instantly. I would say around half of us that were left managed to get the seatbelt secured before going down the hill. Everyone else had to hold on for dear life. And unfortunately, I was one of them. I felt my stomach start to drop as I reached up to grab the only thing that would keep me from becoming a part of the pavement below. The restraint wasn't completely useless at this point. I just had a good 12 inches in between my chest and the restraint. As I dug my fingers into the plastic, I hoped I would be fine. Then the ride dropped. I felt my butt lift off the seat I had become so familiar with. I tried to wrap my ankles around the floor of the coaster to keep the rest of my body from flying out. Charlie luckily got the restraint down, so he was trying to get his leg over mine and hold me down with his arm. After the longest 5 seconds of my life, I managed to pull it back down over my chest. I wasn't sure who else got theirs down, but I assumed, from how scared a few of them sounded, it wasn't good. All I could think about and look at was the big loop coming up. As we got closer, I could hear swearing from multiple passengers, including someone in front of me. She was violently pulling at the restraint, but it just wasn't budging. I was hoping and praying that the centrifugal force would keep her in her seat. As we went around the big loop, I closed my eyes. I knew I didn't want to see what was about to happen. I heard multiple people screaming and making horrendous cracking sounds. I don't have an exact number, but I would say only 7 people were left. I could see the 2 people in the very front row and Charlie beside me. I recall only hearing 3 other voices behind me at this point. At hour 5, 3 more people died while on the ride. 2 of them from a heart attack or something. The 3rd person, well, he watched the person beside him suddenly die while going around one of the bends. He yelled out in anger and well, I'd actually rather not go into detail. But he died soon after. I saw the whole thing. They were the 2 people left in front of me and Charlie. At hour 6, we saw a group of people bringing in what looked like another large net. Except that it was in the loading area. The next time we looped around, they wrote something new on the big whiteboard. "We are going to try and stop it manually." I had no clue what this meant, but by the look of the net, I was terrified. The next pass, there were people on both sides of the loading area. On one side, the net was wrapped around a large pole that had been somehow fastened into the concrete slab. I saw a large, similar pole on the other side, but the net wasn't yet attached. As we zoomed by, I could hear people trying to rush and hurry behind us. We went around one of the turns and I cranked my neck, looking to see what plan they had in mind. They were frantically trying to tie the other side of the net to the support beam that was freshly drilled into the ground. I couldn't believe how stupid these people were. How on earth did they think this was a good idea? Was this a last-ditch attempt? I was yelling at them and telling them to stop, but of course they couldn't hear me. Even if they could, they wouldn't listen. They were desperate to get at least someone out of this alive. Or maybe the owner of the park wanted all of us to die so that no one could publicly talk about the horrific things we went through. As we went past the last bend, the hundreds of people watching the spectacle cheered, clapped, and celebrated. Somehow, not seeing any of the flaws with this terrible plan. We were on the straightaway and my heart started to pound again. The few seconds before we hit the net felt like slow motion. I swore I could see everyone's face. They looked happy. I couldn't believe it. It made me upset because I knew they were all about to be very disappointed. Finally, we hit the net. Of course, it was no match for a giant metal contraption hitting it. The metal pole was ripped out of the concrete slab and smashed down right in between our car and the one behind us. As we headed for the incline, we tried to get the net that attached itself to us off of the coaster. Luckily, we were able to get it off of us, but no luck with the metal beam that was now awkwardly lodged in the coaster. As we started going down, the whole ride started to shake violently. It felt like we were going to fly off the track. We made it to the first turn. I heard a loud snap and 2 screams. The 7 coaster cars behind ours broke off, and the metal beam found its way underneath. As we turned, I watched in disbelief as the cars behind us all went flying off the tracks. At that point in the ride, it was about 50 feet off the ground. Still enough to kill them. I wasn't fast enough to close my eyes and saw the whole thing. It went off the track like it had wings and suddenly plummeted down into the earth. The screaming immediately stopped when the ride landed upside down. My imagination filled in the blanks and shuddered at the thought of the carnage below me. And then, there were 2. We were hoping that somehow the ride would stop or slow down because we lost the back 7 cars. I was not sure what the logic was, but we were desperate at this point. After another hour, it was not showing any signs of slowing down. Once we made it to hour 8, we expected our fate. I was hoping that this would all be over soon and we could just be done. I don't think either one of us thought we'd get off. We just hoped at this point that our deaths would be quick. Over the next couple hours, we noticed a piece of metal on the car ahead of us start to wobble and loosen. I'm not sure if it was just the wear and tear of the ride going for so long or the whole net fiasco. It kept looking like it was about to come loose and we'd duck out of the way. We were imagining the worst possible outcome, thinking it would fly off and decapitate one of us. Eventually it did come off. But it wasn't a dramatic moment like we thought it would be. It was so much worse. Instead of coming all the way off, it only partially came off and started grinding loudly against the track. We heard an audible cringing sound from everyone watching below. The sound was horrendous. The thin strip of metal started to find its way underneath the car. Charlie was worried it would dislodge the coaster from its tracks like we saw just hours before. He told me he was going to try and grab it. I begged him not to. After a few laps of me telling him to just leave it, he made up his mind and contorted his body to try and grab the sharp metal. I couldn't see his hand as he reached down for it, but I could see his face. Somehow that made it worse. His expression quickly changed from focused to shocked in a matter of seconds. His face was blank. I heard screaming but had no clue what was going on. He lifted up his arm and I don't think I will ever be able to get the image of what used to be his arm out of my head. When he gripped the metal, it slipped and went deep into his forearm. Tried to grab his shoulder to calm him down, but to my shock he was calm. He was more silent at that moment than he had been the whole day. He wouldn't even look at me. He was almost mesmerized by the sight of his bloodied, disfigured arm. I felt lightheaded and had a ringing in my ears. Watching the blood start to make its way down his entire body, then to me in the floor of the coaster. It was making me feel sick watching the blood move around the car as we went around the twists and turns of the ride. Within minutes, Charlie looked like a ghost. I did my best to try and wrap his arm up with shreds of my shirt, but it was completely pointless. I don't think an old t-shirt can help when you see the bone. I tried to talk to him. I tried to make him feel as comfortable as I could, but it was no use. He was fading in and out of consciousness. We began going up the ascent and he finally looked over at me. I couldn't begin to explain all that I saw in his eyes. Could see the pain and sadness but also the relief. He knew he was going to die. But I don't think he cared. He gave me a weak nod of the head and looked ahead when we went down the hill. I tried to keep a close eye on him this lap, but it was honestly hard to look at him. I heard him take a deep breath right before the loop. When we finished the loop I looked over at him and, well, he was gone. I was now left alone in the death trap. I never imagined it could have gotten any worse. But having a dead body sitting next to you on a roller coaster is not something I would recommend. I was sitting in shock next to my dead friend for a couple hours. I was frozen in fear, not wanting to even think of a way out. After gaining some courage, I contemplated my next move. I came back into reality and realized the coaster was going just slightly slower. It wasn't significant, but if the loops were taking just slightly longer than before, that damn piece of metal that killed Charlie must have made its way underneath and not derailed it but slowed it down. I ended up taking off my shoes and Charlie's shoes. I had a plan that was probably dumb, but if I died at least it would be in my hands. As I went by the loading area, the coaster started to slow down just before the ascent. I threw all 4 shoes right in front of the ride. A part of a shoe caught the truck in just the right spot. The ride was still. I could feel the coaster almost pulsing, trying to move with all its might. I was sore. My shoulders were badly buried by the shoulder restraints, repeatedly hitting me over and over again. My whole lower half aching from sitting in a hard seat for hours on hours. I took a deep breath and squeezed in my gut like I never had before. I let out a horrific yell as I forced my body out of the restraint that had been holding me down for the last 12 hours. About 360 times around the track. My heart was racing as I felt the coaster start to win the battle to move again. I managed to squeeze out just seconds before it took off. I was freed and jumped. Luckily, I just barely hit the net below. I also managed to hit the net, so I didn't hurt myself too badly. Nothing is worse than what that ride already did to me. I laid on the net, looking up into the sky. In disbelief. I was still. I wasn't moving. It was almost making me feel motion sick not moving around. Like when you are reading a book in the car and you look up after an hour. Everything was blurry. I could barely hear the faint sound of people trying to get to me. But it was mostly just my ears ringing and my heart beating. After just a few minutes, I was down. They immediately rushed me to the ER, where I stayed for 3 weeks. I sustained a broken rib, a broken collarbone, severe bruising, and a concussion, just to name a few. Not to mention the mental trauma. I'm writing this as I'm feeling ready to finally tell my story. This is the first time I'm digging back into my memories and recollecting the whole experience. I started to work through all this with a therapist, and it's made me realize I need to get it all out of my system. Don't bother trying to find anything about this story. The owners of the park have done a suspiciously good job hiding it. That's another reason I want to get my story out there. They have completely scrubbed the internet of it somehow. Although talking with a professional has helped, there are still some sounds and images that I can just never completely get out of my head. If you take one thing from my story, it's that you should trust yourself. Even if you don't believe in a higher power or gut instincts. If you have a feeling, trust it. Please. Every night a different person walks down the street and screams for help. We aren't allowed to help them. Looking back, I feel dumb. Completely stupid, actually. I should have known that apartment was far too cheap to be right, even for a studio. I should have known there had to be a catch. The day I moved in was a complete blur. I insisted that no one help me, not wanting to prove any of my family members' suspicions about my character. By late afternoon, all my muscles ached terribly and my head throbbed. I fell back on my bare mattress, staring up at the ceiling fan with glazed-over eyes. I pulled the damp strands of hair from my sweaty forehead, wincing in disgust. Someone knocked on my door, causing me to jump. I cursed under my breath, pushing myself up on my elbows. 2 girls were peeking around my door frame. Foolishly, I had left it wide open, forgetting the old college rule. Only leave your door open if you want to make new friends. And I was not in the mood to make new friends. One of them, an Asian girl with choppy black hair, was grinning at me. The other stood a little further back, fingering a box of Marlboro Reds. "Hey," she said, nodding at me. Her voice was smooth and raspy at the same time. "Did you just move in?" I laid back down, rubbing my face with both hands, choosing not to bother with manners. "Yeah. About 5 seconds ago." "Cool." The girls walked in, evidently ignoring my very clear body language. The girl with the black hair ran her fingers along the edge of my desk, and then picked up a little ceramic duck from my unpacked box of trinkets. "Grandma," I explained, feeling strangely defensive. "Cute," she replied, holding it up to her face. "Has anyone told you yet?" The other girl asked abruptly, looking around my apartment. She had tucked the cigarettes into the back pocket of her jeans, and was now tugging at her long red braids. "Jesus, Gianna, give her a second." "Well, she needs to know." "Yeah, but we haven't even asked her name." I blinked at the 2 strangers incredulously. I hadn't even had time to put toilet paper in my bathroom, and here they were, touching my things and talking about me like I wasn't there. I just wanted to take a nap, honestly. "My name's Arden," I said. The girl with the red braids, Gianna, sat down next to me on my bed. "Did they tell you?" "Tell me what?" "Oh, of course they didn't. The rules." I blinked again, my face blank. I didn't know about any rules besides the typical renting ones. I had signed the lease after, at best, skimming over it. The landlord was a skinny woman who smelled of ashes, and I was fairly certain she had never developed the facial muscles necessary for smiling. I wasn't about to ask her any follow-up questions, especially when the rent was so cheap. The other girl laughed nervously. "Where did you move here from?" I ignored her. "What rules?" Gianna got a strange, wicked sort of smile on her face, bouncing a little on my mattress. The other girl sighed loudly. "Something happens here every night," she began, pulling out my rickety office chair and sitting down. "Something weird." "Like what?" I sat up, frowning at her. Finally, my interest was piqued. "Someone walks down the street," Gianna said, her voice reminding me of a camp counselor telling a scary story around the bonfire. "That one right down there." She pointed at my window. "It's someone different each night. They scream for help for about an hour. But we aren't supposed to help them." I just stared at her. I felt a small chill run up my spine. I didn't know what to make of all this. "It happens at a different time every night," the other one said softly. We never know when it's coming. Why? She shrugged almost sadly. We don't know why. I scoffed, leaning my elbows against my knees. I don't believe you. The girl shrugged. You don't have to. You'll see for yourself. The look in her eyes made me want to believe her. She seemed sincere, but I couldn't even begin to fathom what they were saying being true. It was too strange, too outlandish. I knew this wouldn't be the nicest neighborhood, but it couldn't be that bad. It had to be a prank, they had to be hazing me or something. We'll come back later, Gianna said matter-of-factly. We'll show you. Before I could protest, she grabbed the other girl by the wrist and they were gone. I followed them to the door, watching them march down the hall, talking to each other in hushed voices. I closed my door behind them. That night, as promised, they came back. They came dragging along two boys. One was somewhat muscular, wearing a tight black t-shirt and baggy jeans, and my eyes were instantly drawn to a silver heart-shaped locket around his neck. He smiled at me and introduced himself as Will when he walked in. The other boy was smaller but chubbier and nervous-looking, with a buzz cut and ill-fitting cargo shorts. His name, I was told, was Matteo. The girl named Gianna came in carrying a bottle of wine and that same slightly crumpled box of cigarettes. The other one, the girl I still didn't know the name of, was the only one who looked even somewhat apologetic. They all sat down on my dusty floor next to the window and motioned for me to join them. I sat between Will and the nameless girl, unsure whether I should continue feeling violated or if I should just give in to my strange, pushy neighbors. Do you all live in this building? I asked, hesitantly accepting the wine when it was passed to me. Yeah, Will answered with a grin. It seemed half-hearted. This building is where all the young people live. It's where they put us, Gianna cut in, lighting a cigarette. It didn't even occur to me to tell her not to smoke inside. We've all been sorted out. Forgive. She's a bit of a conspiracy theorist. It's not a theory, she snapped, glaring at him. Look at the other ones. Next door, the middle-agers. People with kids but no grandkids. Across the street, old people. Not a single 20-something in that entire building. May, tell him. So her name was May. I looked her over, admiring her smoky eye makeup and how she tied her hair up, long strands poking out like exploding fireworks. Stop it, May muttered, reaching for the wine bottle. You'll scare her. I'm not scared. She just shrugged at me as if she didn't believe me. We passed the bottle around and then around again. I listened to them bicker and laugh. It was clear they'd all been friends for a while, and I felt a little bit like I was intruding, even though they were in my apartment. Will asked me if I had gone to college, and I told him I did, but I dropped out. They all nodded sympathetically, which made me feel stupid. By midnight, I was a little bit buzzed and my guard was beginning to fall. I had to admit it felt good to have friends. I had already mentally resigned myself to a life of solitude, at least for a while, but it seemed that might not actually have to be my fate. I laughed at Matteo and Gianna's drunken argument, passing a cigarette back and forth with May, blowing the smoke out of my open window. I had almost completely forgotten why they were all over when it happened. All at once, a blaring alarm came from each of our phones like an Amber Alert. I could hear the sound echo throughout the neighborhood, like an entire chorus of hundreds of phones going off, not just ours. I nearly leapt out of my skin. Not even Gianna laughed. All of them went quiet and they looked at me as I took it out, frowning at the screen. Do not interfere. It's coming, Will whispered. He had changed, his eyes almost glassy and his voice soft and shaky. Matteo squeezed his shoulder. I looked at May. Her eyebrows were cinched together in concern, and she was stubbing out our cigarette against the windowsill, shrinking away. There was again that chill. It crept up my back, spreading along my scalp and making me shiver. Something felt deeply, deeply wrong. The others were quiet now, staring silently at the window I was sitting up against. The air felt somehow warmer, like it was buzzing with something, or maybe I was just sweating. We sat there, unmoving, for what felt like half an hour. Right as I was getting tempted to ask what was going on, I heard it. It was far away and faint, but I still heard it. A cry. It continued as it got gradually closer, louder, more desperate. Help, please, my God, someone help me. Slowly I leaned out the window. I had to see it with my eyes, had to confirm there was actually someone out there like they had said there would be. My new apartment was on the 4th floor, so it was hard to see who was down on the street without squinting. In the flickering street lights, I could make out the outline of an elderly man. He was hunched over, wandering aimlessly from door to door, wearing only what looked like a hospital gown to cover his pale, broken body. Behind him trailed a path of dripping blood, although I couldn't see where it was coming from. Please? I'm hurt, I looked back at the others, my mouth hanging open. What is this? I demanded loudly. What the hell is this? May touched my arm, trying to calm me down. I pulled away from her. Arden, please, we have to help him. Why can't we help him? He's just an old man. We can't help him. Trust me. I ignored her, leaning further out the window, prepared to call out to him. Before I could open my mouth, I froze. The man down there was still now facing our building. His head was tilted upwards and I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was looking right at me. I immediately felt cold, like I was plummeting into ice water. Help me, he whimpered into the silent night air, his voice barely audible. Then he began to scream. That scream wasn't human. Or at least not any human I had ever met. It was desperate, agonized. It made my stomach turn and my eyes prick with tears. I couldn't look away. The blood was coming from his arms. Or I should say his lack of arms. Where his arms should have been there were only bloody, mangled stumps. They looked fresh. He didn't move other than a shaky sway, and his eyes didn't leave me. His shriek slowly molded into words that I could just barely understand. Please, 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 please. May yanked me backwards, away from the window. I landed on my ass and yelped in pain and horror. What is that thing? I whispered. I didn't mean to whisper, but that was all that came out. We don't know, May replied, her eyes trained on Will, who was crying now. Mateo held on to him like he might topple over. We just know to follow the rules. What happens if you don't follow the rules? I asked and immediately regretted it. Will sobbed softly. Outside, the old man wailed. Gianna reached over and pulled the window shut, but it somehow did nothing to muffle the blood-curdling sound. Do you want to tell her, or should I? Mateo asked Will. Will just shook his head. He was clutching his locket now, turning the little heart over between his fingers. Mateo sighed and turned towards me. A couple of months ago, one of them got to Will's girl. Shannon, Gianna butted in. Her name was Shannon. Sorry? Her name is Shannon. I swallowed, but whatever I did, nothing would force down the lump in my throat. What happened? Mateo shook his head. We don't know, we were all together when the screaming started. Usually we just ignore it now, you know? No use in dwelling on it. But that night we think she saw something different. She started insisting she had to help and she ran outside. We couldn't stop her. He paused, glancing over at Will. He was silent and still. The screaming outside had begun to pass, getting softer as it continued further down the street. Then what? He shrugged. Nothing. She was just gone. I pressed my lips together, trying to process all of this. I really had believed they were messing with me, but I had seen it, I had witnessed it firsthand. And it terrified me. Why doesn't anyone leave? He shrugged for a second time. Can't afford it. Or people just don't care. Some people have left, but we all signed an NDA with the lease, so nobody ever knows. I frowned, thinking back to signing the paperwork, trying to remember. I could vaguely picture what he was talking about. I had just assumed it was more legal jargon that I would never understand. Had I seriously signed a non-disclosure agreement without even noticing? After that, I told them I wanted to go to bed. I needed time to process all of this. They understood, and each one of them said goodbye before leaving me alone. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, for some strange reason I thought of May's face when we had realized it was happening. How she'd put out the cigarette and backed away from the window. Eventually, I was able to drift off to sleep. The next few weeks were difficult. I spent more and more time with my new neighbors. I came to find that they were right. I didn't think there was a single person older than 30 in our entire building, but I saw them all the time, leaving the one next door. Settling in was difficult. The others seemed so used to it, they cared. Of course it scared them. Especially Will. But you could tell they had been here a while by the way they sighed, closing the blinds and focusing harder on whatever they were doing. Eventually I began to mimic them. It helped a little bit to pretend it was normal, as strange as that sounds. Moving out wasn't really an option for me anyways. I was a college dropout and I hadn't found a job yet. I was still just getting by on what I had managed to save up. Every night it was someone different. Some were more human, some seemed less. Some were drenched in blood, their clothes ripped and strange, but some looked fairly normal. The worst were the children. They would run like injured chickens, screeching and banging on doors, begging for help. Sometimes they would try different things, say different things. Like they're coming. Like I don't want to die. Or even I'm sorry. There were a lot of children. One night, while I was half awake, an alarm went off. It wasn't like the one on our phones. It was blaring, only somewhat muffled by my window. My apartment glowed a flashing red from outside. I didn't even look. I was too scared of what I might see. I just covered my head with my pillow and tried to fall back asleep. I came to learn all of the theories, especially from Gianna. She thought we had all been chosen and predetermined to live here, all for some sick little government game. She thought maybe there were people betting on the different buildings, putting down money on who would interfere the least. See that? She said to me one day in the hallway returning from a coffee run. Cameras everywhere. I didn't know if I believed her. I spent time with May mostly. We smoked on the front steps and people watched. It was strange to see what at night was such a sinister and gruesome neighborhood, during the day bright and lively. She didn't talk much about the rules. So I didn't either. We didn't talk all that much in general, I found, just enjoying each other's company. Right when I was beginning to feel comfortable was when it happened. It started with a birthday cake. Happy birthday. As May walked through the door, Matteo blew into his plastic party horn. The paper inflated, smacking Will on the side of the head. May's hand flew to her heart. Jesus Christ. You fuckers know I hate surprises. Gianna laughed and walked over to her. In her hand she held a chocolate cake, haphazardly adorned with sprinkles and bright pink icing that read, Happy Birthday Amy, in the center. 24. She set down the cake on the dresser and threw her arm around May's neck. How does it feel? Fucking awful. That's the spirit. Enough of this, Matteo cut in, weaving between them. Let's eat some cake, then let's go. Their tradition, I had learned, was to bar hop for birthdays. They told me there was no curfew here, despite the rules, just a recommended time to be home, which was 10:30 p.m. Usually they said they got home before the alarm or spent the night somewhere else. We all took some cake. The boys took shots in the kitchen to pregame while I watched Gianna fuss over May's hair. I was never much of a partier. While at clubs or bars in college, I spent most of the time out back, chatting with the smokers. But then again, I was never much of a friend group person either, so maybe the circumstances were changing. I watched them all troop outside to Matteo's car. I stuffed myself in the back, incredibly conscious of how close I was pressed into May, my other shoulder rammed into the car door. Matteo's music, cranked up to maximum volume, hurt my ears, and the tiny space was packed with the smell of tobacco and various perfumes as we sped down the freeway toward the city, but it was nice. It was really nice. I found myself laughing with them, and I hooked my arm around May's when she weaseled her hand beneath my elbow. It was actually nice. As predicted, the bars they chose weren't exactly my scene. But this time, as opposed to college, I could stand it. I took shots, I followed them out for smoke breaks, I even danced under the low purple lights until my feet ached inside my chunky heels, surely riddled with blisters. By the time we got to our third bar, I couldn't even feel it anymore. And it was at that third bar that we crammed ourselves into an old photo booth, and Gianna reluctantly offered $5 to the slot, and we laughed, red-faced, into a tiny camera. After the photos spit out into the compartment, the others slid through the red curtains, but before I could follow, May grabbed my wrist. She held me back, sliding her long baby blue nails up my wrist. I shivered. You never gave me a birthday present, she whispered, and I could feel her breath on my face. If I was wearing my glasses, they would have been fogging up. Yeah, well, I didn't get to finish my quip before she kissed me. It was nice. And then it wasn't. Hey, Will called out to me, squeezing through a crowd of men wearing tattered leather jackets to get to me. Arden, where's everybody else? I blinked, looking around. I could have sworn they had been right there a second ago, but now none of them were anywhere to be found. I shrugged. Dunno. Why, what's up? He finally broke free from the swaying mass and I got a better look at him. He looked worried. His face was flushed and I could see a few drops of sweat creeping out from his hairline. He took his phone out of his pocket and held it out to me. First I saw his home screen. It was him next to a girl with strawberry blonde hair, both clutching beer bottles and grinning widely at the camera. Then I looked where he actually wanted me to. The time. 1:47 a.m. It's getting late, he narrated. Can we find the others and get going? I understood then. He was worried. It was past 1 a.m. and no alarm yet. It was later than usual. The bars would start closing soon. He wanted to get back before it happened. Will and I weaved through the crowd. I was pretty buzzed and I realized I was having a hard time moving my feet right, which made me feel embarrassed. I hadn't even had that much to drink. Was I that much of a lightweight? We found them outside, chain smoking. Will explained the situation while I swayed. The drive back was strangely tense. Matteo's music was turned down, and there wasn't any joking or boisterous gossiping like there had been on the way out. We all felt it didn't need to be said. Something was off. Will drove fast, almost reckless. In the dark, May took my hand. Just as he was careening around the last corner, and we could almost make out the shape of our apartment building down the street. It happened. All of our phones went off at once. Gianna let out a small shriek from the other side of the back seat. Do not interfere. Matteo turned back towards us, pressing his finger to his lips. Had this ever happened before? By their reactions, I didn't think so. It was different when it came when I was in my bedroom, when I could just shut the curtains and put my headphones on. I felt so small and helpless then, like I was gazing into the maw of something incomprehensibly beyond my understanding. I felt like we were all flies and this neighborhood right now was the spider's web. We drove slowly now. Maybe 5 miles an hour. We were all still, we were all silent. Not even a stray breath cut through the quiet. Underneath the glowing streetlights, I could make out the side of Will's face. He was pale, and if I hadn't seen his knee shifting as he pressed down on the brakes, I could have mistaken him for a mannequin. The car came to a stop. I followed his gaze, all the way down the street to the dark horizon. And I saw what he saw. A silhouette. It was far too distant to make out what shape it took, but it was evidently humanoid. It moved in a shaky stumble, limping down the middle of the road in our direction. And in the overwhelming silence, I could hear it, far away but still deeply urgent. Help me, Will, Gianna hissed. Turn the car around. Will didn't move. He just stared forward, as white as paper. It didn't make any logical sense, but I knew what he knew. It was too late now. There was no use. Help me, please help. I could tell now that it was a girl from its voice and its figure as it got closer. It was wearing some sort of white nightgown, not unlike the old man's hospital attire from that first night, stained with dark red blood. From here I couldn't tell if it was fresh or dry. I didn't know why that mattered to me. Maybe, May whispered. Her arm shook against mine. Maybe if we're quiet and we duck down, it won't see us. Deep down it felt as hopeless as turning around had felt, but it seemed reasonable. I nodded and did as she suggested, crouching behind the passenger seat, my knees throbbing from the strange angle I'd bent myself into. We all did it except for Will. He didn't move. He still just looked. When he finally spoke, I could barely hear him, it was so weak. Shannon, the word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Matteo was the one to break the silence. What? Shannon, he repeated, finally turning to look at his friend. That's Shannon. I peered over the seat in front of me, squinting my eyes. The human-like thing was getting closer, and now I could make out strawberry blonde hair, round face, short legs. The girl from Will's phone lock screen. The girl who had disappeared. Shannon. May gasped next to me. Dude, Matteo said slowly, his words crumbling as soon as they left his mouth. I know what you're thinking, dude. Do not get out of this car. Will didn't even seem like he was with us anymore. He was in shock, I think, looking back. I have to help her, he insisted, right as another sickening cry rang out. Help me. Help. Help me, please, someone, it hurts. It was getting far too close to us for comfort, but it still didn't seem to notice the car. Its cries became more and more desperate as they got louder. I have to help her, Will repeated, and a bit of life had returned to his face. Matteo shook his head and grabbed at his sleeve. Will, that is not Shannon. Will glared at him, his eyes shining with tears. I know Shannon. That's her. I know you do, dude, and I know you miss her, but please, please don't do this. Their voices were getting louder and more distraught, and I felt May press into my side, trembling like a leaf. Gianna was whimpering, but I couldn't see her from my position. The thing was almost to our car when it stopped. She turned her head left, then right, almost like she was sniffing the air. The boys stopped arguing. I felt like my heart would burst out of my chest. I could see Shannon's face now, and I realized why she hadn't seen us. The girl's face was streaked with gore, and it looked like her eyes had been scooped out with a melon spoon. She cried, drool pouring from her slackened mouth, but no tears could come. It happened too quickly. None of us could stop him. Will violently ripped his arm away from Matteo, fumbling for the handle to the car door. Gianna screamed. Matteo tried to slam down on the lock, but he missed, and Will managed to get the door open before he could try again. He stumbled onto the asphalt and hit the ground with a soft crunch. The thing turned her head and began to scream. But instead of charging at Will, she backed away. She held her arms out in front of her like something might attack her, whipping her head around wildly. An alarm went off like the one I had heard that one night, but far more unbearable now that I was in it. The streetlights lining either side of the street switched to a flashing red, and Matteo threw himself into the driver's seat, the tires screeching as he peeled away. Gianna was screaming at him, pleading with him to go back. May was weeping into her hands. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I didn't understand. As we sped away, I looked back. I couldn't help it. I saw the flash of some sort of van in the blinding red light, pulling around the corner. Then nothing. That was a week or two ago. I don't know. I've been having a hard time keeping track of time. None of us have spoken much since that night. We tried the police, of course, but as you could assume, nothing came of it. I think whatever this is far larger than we know. I don't know if it's some kind of experiment or just a sick game, but I'm going to move back into my parents' house next week, despite all their berating, and then figure out what to do from there. I don't know if that was really Shannon that we saw that night, or if it was something else, and I don't know which is worse. All I know is that last night, I heard Will's voice outside my window, crying, pleading for help. I didn't interfere. Am I the asshole for my girlfriend not getting into the school she wanted? My girlfriend is a non-traditional college student. She completed her associates last spring with a very high GPA and meant to apply to some prestigious schools. Whenever she started working on her applications, though, she would panic and shut down. She ended up missing all of her deadlines. She did complete her application for one Ivy League school, but didn't submit it at the last moment, saying it was embarrassing and that she had no place there. I didn't know what to do in these moments, to be honest, but I am sure what I did wasn't right. She would really shut down and pull into herself, going into a 1,000-yard stare or breaking down in tears. I tried consoling her, but I can't remember a time it worked. I read over her application essays and made suggestions, but she would get defensive and reject them. I'm a pretty bad writer and she's a very good one, so that was likely the right call. Now she's at a local public university and in tears every day because she finds it isn't the right fit. She blames me and tells me I didn't help enough, that she never felt supported through the process. I asked how I could have helped and she called me an asshole, saying she didn't know how to explain how to help people. She says she doesn't know if she can forgive me for this. I am willing to accept I'm the asshole and I'm what's holding her back, but I legitimately don't know what I should have done. How does one help an adult shutting down? What was I supposed to do in this situation? I honestly feel terrible, and having no idea what my proper role should have been just makes it worse. Am I the asshole for sharing my opinion with my brother and warning him about his wife unprompted? My brother, 36M, and his wife Emma, 35F, have known each other for the best part of 2 decades. They were in the same friend group toward the end of high school and lost touch after graduation for a while, but ended up reconnecting when the larger friend group reconnected. Then Emma moved away and they lost touch again. In that time my brother got married and had his kids, 11M and 9F. Emma moved back about 5 years ago and started spending more time with the old friend group, my brother included, though they didn't seem to get closer until after the death of one of their shared friends. My brother's marriage to the mother of his children was never super great. It only got worse when the kids were no longer babies, however, and they separated 4 years ago. Their divorce was finalized a little over 2 years later. Before the divorce was finalized, my brother and Emma started dating. They broke up briefly and got back together, but Emma's attitude toward the kids' mom was incredibly negative around the time of the breakup and remained the same after they got back together. Emma and my brother got engaged fast, and then my brother's ex, the kids' mom, died. The kids weren't happy about living with Emma, and less so about Emma trying to step into a motherly role for them. They know how she felt about their mom, and with her gone the loyalty pull was stronger and the dislike for Emma more intense. My brother and Emma's wedding day was a shit show and the kids protested the whole way through, which my brother was aware of, but he said they'd been okay with Emma before, as in before he dated her, so they were just protesting him being with anyone who wasn't their mom. Emma is jealous of the kids' mom. She's jealous the kids still love her. She still hates their mom for reasons I don't know. The kids know she hates their mom and they use it to taunt her. They tell her almost every day, if Emma is to be believed, that she'll never be as good as their mom and they will never love her or accept her because she isn't good enough. They compare Emma's cooking to their mom's, they compare the way she decorates, stuff like that. I know they do it. But I also know Emma has kicked up a fuss about the kids keeping their mom's things and having them in their bedrooms, as well as having photographs of her. Which, if you ask me anything, is likely the reason the kids are so quick to compare the way they do. The household is toxic. Emma's jealousy of their mom grows and the kids' dislike for Emma grows. My brother acts like things are fine and he's burying his head about the growing issues. I decided not to ignore it and address this with my brother. I told him Emma and the kids are not getting along and her jealousy is going to make his home even more of a living hell than it already is. And I told him I did not think Emma could come back from her jealousy and warned him that she could cost him the kids. He told me he didn't ask for my opinion and to mind my own business. Am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for calling my mom unreliable? I'm 16 years old and I needed a foam mat for a science project. The only problem is these are not near our house and at a store 30 minutes away. I don't got a license, so I told my mom before I went to school to buy it for me. Just to make sure she did, I even sent her messages during school to get it, which she agreed to. When I got home Tuesday, I discovered that she completely forgot about it and said that she was too tired to drive to the store right now. I was slightly nervous because the project is due Friday, but it wasn't too big of a deal because I was sure I could do it in that time. So, I told her to buy it tomorrow, Wednesday, and sent her a message during school again to buy it. When I got home, she was chatting with friends she invited over. So I reminded her if she got it, and her reply was no, so I asked if we could go right now, but she said no because her friends are here. At this point, I was irritated but didn't push it and just made her promise she'd get it tomorrow. Eventually, her friends did leave around 7, but I was already deep into my homework by then and didn't get to bed until 11. So today rolls around and I told her she must absolutely get it now as the project is due tomorrow. She confirms and says she got it, but when I got home she didn't have the dang thing. I was irritated at this point and just remarked that even with all my reminders that she still proves to be unreliable. She got mad and started screaming at me, calling me ungrateful and critical of her mistakes. So now I'm in the car with my friend going to that store because my mom refused to take me after I said that to her. So am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for not smiling at my mom after she left with my siblings? To start things off, I don't really know what's going on with my parents. Ever since I was a kid, my mom would always suddenly try to leave our house and shit, but this time is the first time she succeeded. So a few days ago I was watching a movie, and my mom started packing up things and I asked her where she was going. She told me to come with her for 2 days and that it's going to be a vacation, but when I asked her where, she didn't tell me. I've known her for so long that I knew she was leaving because of problems involving my dad. I said no though. Both my siblings were going and I didn't want to leave my dad because I didn't want him to be lonely. I also didn't want to be seen as if I picked sides, so I just tried to keep away from it. My dad came home and found out everyone was gone. I thought he would have lashed out, but he just looked sad with the groceries he bought for my siblings. He left some time after to look for them. He called me a few times asking me if I knew where my mom was and telling me to text her to ask where she was. He sounded so disappointed when he asked me why I didn't know where she was. It stung lol. My dad came home. I heard him calling with my mom. Judging from what I heard, my dad was able to talk to her while he was searching for them and that they'd come home the next day. They did come home and she was smiling and told me I should have come. I don't remember what I said, but it was along the lines of I have stuff to do, which was actually true. After that, my mom kept trying to get close with me, constantly kissing me. It was the type of kisses that were disgusting and felt like they left saliva. I've always told her that I was uncomfortable with it, but she never listens. I avoided her a few times after that, by leaving after 5 to 7 minutes that she was there because she kept trying to do that. It was never this bad before. She keeps asking me if I have a problem with her in an angry voice that I really dislike. I'm not sure what to do. I haven't been smiling at her these past couple days since I kept staying in my room reading. She would knock on my door asking to see me. I always answered but would never prolong it. She asked me if I wanted to make pizza a while ago. I didn't really answer and just followed her since I was feeling so tired. She asked me if I had a problem with her again while I was eating. I said no and that I was just tired. I bumped into my dad. He actually noticed that I looked tired lol. Or maybe it was because I accidentally slept on the table LMAO. I honestly don't know what to do with my mom. I don't really want to talk to her because she's tried to kiss me again and it's so gross, but she just keeps pushing my boundaries, but at the same time I don't really like frequently getting asked, do you have a problem with me? Since it's honestly very uncomfortable. I kinda need advice, but I want to know if it's mean or assholish to not smile at your parents since I'm practicing being a better person. Am I the asshole for telling my ML to fuck off? So my husband Cashin, 30M, and I, 28F, and I have been married for 3 years and am currently 30 weeks pregnant, will become relevant later. Cashin has never had a good relationship with his mom because she was very invasive when he was a kid and did a bunch of really crazy stuff to him. Constantly accused him of doing drugs / having unprotected sex, drinking and so much more. For example of severity, one time after she wrongly accused him of stealing her vodka, she pressed the lid of another bottle against his mouth and said something to the effect of, if you want it so much, then drink the whole bottle. Right now. Drink it. And tried to make him drink it. He left the house. She found the bottle later because she'd put it somewhere safe. To clarify, all of these things were just wild accusations, and it's safe to say that he didn't have a good relationship with her in his childhood or adulthood. He has an okay relationship with his dad, a lot better than his mom, and they talk at least once a month, but it's very rare that he has contact with her now. I've met her once or twice. His family tend to have these really big birthday parties. He has 5 brothers and an incredible amount of aunts/uncles/cousins, and there was one this weekend that we both went to for one of his uncles that he was close to growing up and still speaks to now. He knew that his parents were going to be there but figured with everyone else that was also going to be there that we could just avoid his mum or whatever worked. All was okay when we got there. We milled around for a bit and Cashin ended up going off to speak to one of his brothers, and I was making my way over to go to see one of his aunts when I was stopped by his mum. I thought she wasn't going to do anything at the party, so we had a conversation and she asked me about how everything is, and then asked if she could touch the baby bump. I kind of laughed it off and said that I'd rather she didn't, because I'm not a big fan of people I don't know touching me. She started getting pushy then, saying stuff like, "I'm going to be this baby's grandmother, and I have a right to know them and watch them grow up." She continued and said, "I know that Cashin hates me, but that's because he was always such a sensitive child." To me, this was the point when I was just done with her shit, and so I told her to fuck off. It just proves to me that she's not changed, because she still doesn't admit to doing any wrong and treats mine and Cass' kid with the same entitlement that she treats him with. I said she had no right to see the baby and that if she hadn't gotten the clue by now, then she probably never will. I know I could have been nicer about it, but I was just done. Cass and I left and he's not really bothered by it at all, but I know I could have dealt with it with more tact. Am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for telling my FIL that he's a shit father? So I, 27F, knew my husband Rowan, 29M, for a while before we even dated. We grew up in the same town and we were good friends through school, so I met a lot of his family etc. when I was a kid. We lost contact for uni but then kind of talked again after and have evidently dated and got married. When I was a kid I always kind of thought that Rowan's dad was weird. I obviously didn't have much context for it then, but I always thought it. His mum passed away when Rowan was young and he has one older brother, 40M, but obviously the age gap meant that they weren't very close for much of his childhood. I know that when Rowan was a teen he acted out, drank a lot with his friends, got into fights, didn't have good grades. I don't doubt that he was a difficult kid to raise, but I always thought that he was a good person, and still do. When we started dating he told me about the reasons behind him acting out, that his father was always drinking or out, that he constantly told Rowan that he wasn't good enough, that he was a shit son etc., accused him of sneaking out/unprotected sex/drugs, constantly tore apart his room looking for incriminating things. Rowan's changed a lot now and is a genuinely down-to-earth guy that would help anyone that asked. Him and his father don't really speak anymore. This was mainly due to a huge argument they had when Rowan was about 18 and his dad said that his mum would be really disappointed in him if she was still alive, that he was never going to amount to anything. Rowan told me after that he packed his bags, stayed with a friend for a while and hasn't particularly spoken to his dad ever again. Rowan and I went back to the hometown this weekend to see my parents, and me and my mum went out to a bar for a catch-up. I immediately recognized his dad because he has a bunch of tattoos of random things on his neck and whatnot that I remember looking at as a kid, and he was standing next to me at the bar. We made eye contact and he looked surprised and said something to the effect of, "I heard you and Rowan got married." I'm surprised, he's always been a skirt chaser. Thank God he doesn't speak to me anymore. I repeated the sentiment that I was glad they didn't speak anymore, but added that it was because he'd been a shit father. He got very defensive, saying that Rowan had been difficult to raise and whatnot, and I just turned around and left to go and sit back down with my mum. I kind of pity him, but I wish I'd just not even spoken to him and left it. Am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for expecting my sister to pay back on the due date the money I lent her for her dog's vet bills? On October 1st, I, 35M, lent my sister, 27F, $2,500 for her dog's vet bills. She promised to pay me back on November 1st. She said she would have the money on that date. I have this in writing via text. I've never lent my sister money before and I generally trust her. I didn't care for her dog, but she loved it. It ended up passing on October 15th. She was devastated. I gave her my condolences and went about my life. On November 1st, I asked her to Venmo me the $2,500. She blows up on me asking how I could ask her for money when she is still grieving. She says it's only been 2 weeks since the dog died and she isn't ready to move on. I told her I'm not telling you to move on, I'm telling you to pay me what I'm owed. I asked if she is saying she is not paying me back. She called me an asshole and hung up. I texted her a screenshot of her agreeing to the November 1st date. She ignored me. I can live without getting the $2,500 back with no material effect on my life, but also $2,500 is not an insignificant amount. In talking with our mom, the vet bill was over $7,000 and it didn't save her dog's life. I found out my mom gifted her $2,000 to help out. I have no idea what my sister's finances are like, but I'm guessing they are not good. She is now 7 days late and I haven't seen a dime. We've had several arguments and this has really deteriorated our relationship. Essentially, she is calling me an unsympathetic asshole. But am I? Am I the asshole for asking my mom to text before coming into my home? I 26F, live with my partner, 25M, about 3 hours away from my parents. Today, my parents were coming to visit to celebrate my birthday. They said they would get to the house between 3 and 4, so my partner and I planned a lunch with his parents for earlier in the afternoon. At about 2 p.m. I get a Life 360 notice. I check the app and my parents have been at my house for about half an hour. Some context. I tend to feel a bit more sensitive around needing to feel that my home is my space. When we moved in, my mom wanted a key, but I wanted the decision of spare keys to be made between me and my partner and asked her to wait and let us talk. She went out that afternoon and made herself a key along with several others which she gave to different family members she felt should have keys. So I am already a bit more sensitive to feeling a need to have control around my home. Anyway, today I called my mom and tried to keep things light by laughing and saying, "Oh mom, you're supposed to text me before you just go in, silly?" But I could tell this upset her and she said she didn't know that was a rule. I was smiling and trying to stay light and I just said, "That's okay, just in future can you text me when you get there and are going in if we're not home?" I tried to make some other small talk but she was upset and so we hung up. I received a text shortly after saying along the lines of, "I do not feel welcome at your house and so I'm leaving. I would never ask you to text me before coming into my home. We will be leaving the cupcakes and gift. We are going to see your brother and then we'll be going home. I feel sick and anxious." I'm not sure if this is an unreasonable boundary to set, though I tried to be as kind and light-hearted as possible with it. I love my mom and all she does for me. At the same time, this is also my partner's home. To me, I feel respected and recognized as an individual when my parents just let me know they have arrived and are going in when I'm not home. I will be talking this through with my psychologist, but in the meantime, am I the asshole? Edit, I appreciate all of the feedback and concerns. I do know who has access to these keys and am not worried about any safety issues. They are people my partner and I would have considered sharing keys with ourselves, but would have wanted to make that decision independently. At this point, we are moving in a few months, so it's not worth changing the locks. I do see the move as an opportunity to reinforce that I am not comfortable with anyone making keys but us and that we will decide who receives these keys. Am I the asshole for leaving my mum home after she added herself to a trip I organized? I choose to organize a solo trip drive from my town to our family's sea house. Usually it's a 4H drive, but I decided I wanted to take many detours to test my recently bought car, making the drive around 8H long. The day before leaving, my mom, who is also in love with our sea house, heard about my plans and decided she wanted to come too. The problem is, she is the passenger driver type of person, and going 1 km/h over the limit, it's a death penalty for her. I love being alone and I like going to our second house because in this period the town is empty and quiet. My mom also liked the peace of this place, but she hates doing something that she doesn't like, and my drive would be restricted to going from A to B and I wouldn't have the same degree of freedom that one gets when being home alone. So I tried to tell her I'd rather go by myself, and after a short talk I left. She didn't look upset, but my sister said she called me asshole a few times after I left. Am I the asshole? Edit how the conversation went and extra info. My father bought a new car for himself because his V6 Busso Alfa Romeo broke down, so he gave me his old broken car and told me I could keep it if I could fix it. Took a few months, but once I was done working on the car I started planning the trip. I came back home the day before leaving. I live in a different city because I study there. My mum told me she wanted to come by car too. When I was planning the trip she told me she might reach me by train. I told her that I planned to make a few detours on twisty roads and many stops. She told me that she only wanted to do the highway. I told her I planned my trip long ago and I would have rather stick to my plans, so I proposed to pay for her train ticket, but she told me she didn't want to take the train because she needed to switch it 2 times. She traveled all her life and has a lot of experience with trains and any sorts of means of travel. That's when I said I wasn't going to change my plans because I had been looking forward to that day for so long. You could tell she was hurt and that's why I felt guilty, even though I did all I could to get her to the beach house without completely changing my plans. I have been studying since September for a really hard exam I took on the 4th of November, and this was the only week of vacation I could take before diving back and studying for a December exam. That's why I was so determined in doing what I wanted before getting back on the books. Am I the asshole for telling my mom to stop playing the victim and ruining Thanksgiving? My mom and I have always had a strained relationship. Growing up, I learned early that everything had to be about her, her needs, her feelings. I was expected to manage my emotions around her, tiptoeing through every interaction. To keep the peace. If something didn't go her way, she'd somehow twist the situation until she was the one hurt, the one who'd done everything right, and was never appreciated. I hated the way it made me feel, but I told myself that one day I'd have a chance to set boundaries, to live my life without walking on eggshells. But as an adult, nothing's really changed. I still find myself anxiously checking my tone, weighing every word before I speak, just to keep her from making herself the victim. This year, I decided to host Thanksgiving for the family, and I promised myself it'd be a peaceful day. My mom could come, but I'd just focus on keeping things calm. No drama. Things were fine at first. My dad was cracking jokes, everyone was catching up, and I started to think maybe this time would be different. Then as we sat down to eat, my mom started in. First, it was the small jabs and comments about how I never call, how I'm always too busy for her. I tried to brush them off, but then she moved on to bigger things, saying how family means so much to her, but she feels like she's the only one who cares. That's when she launched into her usual spiel about how much she's sacrificed, how no one appreciates her, and how she's such a good mother who's never shown gratitude. I could feel my blood start to boil. I tried to hold my tongue, but I couldn't do it. I snapped and said, "Mom, you really need to stop playing the victim. It's exhausting and it's why we don't get along." The room went dead silent. She sat there, shocked, before her face crumpled and she started crying. She called me cruel, heartless, and said I'd ruined Thanksgiving. She said she'd only ever tried to love me, but I was too selfish to see it. She stormed out, and my dad followed her, giving me a sad look, like he knew this was coming but couldn't do anything about it. Now the family is completely divided. Some of my relatives have called me to say they understand, that she needed to hear it, but others think I was heartless, that I could have been kinder or more tactful. They keep saying she's my mother and that one day I'll regret speaking to her this way. But a part of me feels like I had to say it. If I didn't draw a line now, I'd be stuck in this cycle forever. I'm conflicted because I never wanted to hurt her, especially not on Thanksgiving. I just couldn't keep pretending her behavior was okay. She refuses to see her role in our issues, and I'm tired of always being the one who has to accommodate her feelings. So, am I the asshole for finally telling her the truth, even if it hurt her? Am I the asshole proving my friend wrong that looks do matter? I, 34M, have a great group of friends who are all really supportive and uplifting, especially with me recently as I try and lose all the weight I've put on since COVID. I've been working on it with diet, exercise, and medication, but it takes time and they've all been amazing. Out of the group, I'm the only one still single, and it's not by choice, with mental, financial, and physical health issues have keeping me single. One of my friends, K, 28F, is very well-meaning but has decided to become my personal cheerleader when it comes to my dating life. She keeps insisting I try dating apps, saying it will just take some time, I need to be patient, and that my personality will shine through. I've told her I've tried them but haven't had much luck and that it's my looks that are holding me back, which I'm actively working on. Kay insists I'm being too negative about myself. The rest of the group just roll their eyes. So, to prove my point, and this is where I might be the asshole, I recreated my dating profiles, same name, background, prompts, but using my friends, who is a good-looking happily married dude, pictures with his permission, to prove my point that looks matter more on dating apps. I showed Kay the results. Over 150 matches on Hinge and a ton of likes and roses on Hinge and a plethora of bots on Tinder. She's now upset, calling me an asshole for showing her how shitty the world can be, saying she was just trying to help. I feel like I might be the asshole for raining on her parade and showing how shitty the single life can be for an overweight single. I also might be a bit of an asshole to those women who have messaged me thinking I'm my good-looking gay friend. So Reddit, am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for refusing to pay for renovations that my parents want because I live at home with them but don't pay rent? For some backstory, I used to work in a different line of work and was living by myself in another city until 2020 when I moved back in with my parents due to my dad going through some medical issues and my mom having to become a caregiver for him for a period of time. I had just switched jobs during COVID and now work 2 fully remote jobs from home with extremely flexible working hours, which has allowed me to essentially become a pseudo-parent for my younger brother who is 12 years my junior. I, 29M, currently live with my parents, late 50s, and my younger brother, 17M. I do not pay rent, however, I take care of 100% of the monthly bills/groceries for the house, owned by parents, after moving back in, and have been paying for any maintenance costs for anything that has broken down in the last 7 years. I have also paid for new appliances to replace broken ones that include a new refrigerator, a new washing machine and 3 new AC units. I am also currently taking care of 100% of my brother's college tuition and will be for the next 2 years, paid for his driving lessons, paid for an old car for him, paying for his rent and food, college is in a different part of the country, and paying for his air tickets to come back and visit once every 3 months. At request of parents, I paid for my own way through college as my parents did not support my choice of studies, including working myself to death to pay for food and lodging during that. I have basically been supporting myself since I was 16. I basically had no social life during that because I had to work 3 different jobs to make ends meet. My parents want to do a major remodel to the house that will cost a not insignificant amount of money. Yes, I am making enough money to pay for all this, but this is where I am putting my foot down and I refused. My parents insisted that since I am living at home and have not paid a single cent of rent for the last 4 years that this is a very reasonable request. The drama has now spread to my extended family and my aunts and uncles are now texting me and saying that I am an ungrateful child since I am refusing this and are trying to pressure me into paying for the renos. I think that I have paid for more than enough in the last 10 years considering all the financial responsibilities that I have taken on. So, internet, am I the asshole for not wanting to pay? Am I the asshole for not letting my in-laws discipline our child? My husband Ronan, 32M, and I, 29F, have one daughter, 3. We've always had very clear and well-established parenting that works well for us and for her. Enter my in-laws. Prior to having our daughter, we've began to see them more frequently, tends to be around 10 times a month, whereas before then it would be maybe once/twice, because Ronan has a reasonably strained relationship with them, particularly his mom. For context, this is because she was one of those people who couldn't let him have his own privacy, constantly looking through his room, asking where/when/with who he was going even into late teens, things like that. He never completely cut contact, but they've been better since we had our daughter and he didn't want to completely cut them out of being grandparents. They've always had a different approach to discipline than we do, another reason why Ronan has a strained relationship, and it's very shouty/punishment based. Raised voices, very tough love, while we tend to prefer calm discussions, occasional timeouts, and natural consequences. Our daughter's a pretty good kid though, she doesn't tend to act out a lot and usually is more than happy just doing her own thing. Yesterday we went to go and see his parents, and she had a tantrum over her granddad taking her favorite toy from her because she's too old for it now. Before I could step in, Ronan's mom had raised her voice and said, "Behave or else." I tried to remain calm with the situation and told them that we won't discipline her that way, and asked that they leave any disciplinary actions to Ronan and I to deal with. They were offended and said that we were coddling her, and that their methods are tried and true. They also accused us of being too soft and that we don't know what we're doing. Ronan stepped in and said that it was our daughter, and we'd raise her how we believe best. We left shortly after this and his in-laws think that I was overreacting and that I'm the problem. I just want what's best for our daughter. So, am I the asshole for not letting them discipline our daughter? Should I have handled this differently? Thanks for reading and any suggestions. Am I the asshole to ban my son's girlfriend from my house? My 52F, son, 22M, has started bringing his girlfriend over a little over a month ago. The first time he brought her over I took it quite formally and cooked up a feast, but it soon became obvious it's becoming a daily thing and not just a one-time formal thing. The first meeting she came quite a bit late and the food was cold by the time she came. No pardons or anything, and when we were done everyone helped to pack up. And we thought she would kinda get the notion, but since it was her first time here we didn't say anything. As for desserts, I like to do this thing. Example, for cupcake I will prepare the icing and everyone would gather and decorate their dessert, but she made it quite clear from the get-go she wasn't interested in it and stuff. So for basically the last month she's almost here daily and she would request for specific dishes with no thanks and stuff. My other son, 17M, has also verbally called him out on her not contributing anything gently, but she said something around the lines of no ring, no wife duties. I don't see this as a wife duty. I would do this for my friends' hangout and everyone in my house put a hand in. My daughters, my husband and my sons. So today when my son told me that she requested a specific meat pie for dinner, I am quite done. However, I don't want to affect my relationship with my son over this. Especially since he really likes her a lot, but I'm really considering banning her from our dinners. Am I the asshole for taking $6,000 from the sale of a house that my girlfriend and I both owned? Am I the asshole for taking $6,000 from the sale of a house that my girlfriend and I both owned? Me, male 38, and my girlfriend, female 37, bought a home together to live in with our kids. I have 1 daughter and she has 2 boys. She sold her previous house and put all of that money into buying this house with me. She couldn't get a mortgage but made great money and basically put all of the dollar down for the down payment and moving expenses. We both paid the mortgage and started a joint account for the house. I started the account and put $5,000 in it, and we each added the same amount each week to cover the bills and anything for the house. Living together was a mistake, and she sent a text one day while I was at work that she talked to a realtor and she was putting the house on the market after 8 months of living there. The house sold quickly for about what we paid, but not before the first buyer backed out. After the first buyer backed out, she left me to pay the mortgage and utilities for the empty house. After a year and a half, we were awarded the first buyer's down payment of $32,000. I haven't taken any money from the sale of the house at this point, and I think $6,000 would be fair. My ex thinks I should only get what I paid for the lawyer to fight for the down payment, which was $2,750. I feel $6,000 is fair. Like I said, she put a lot of money down, and even though the house sold for a similar amount, she still lost a substantial sum of money. Am I the asshole? To be clear, we bought the house for $630,000, we sold it for $620,000. My girlfriend took all the funds from that transaction. Prior to selling it for $620,000, we accepted an offer of $640,000. This buyer walked away and her down payment was in escrow for about a year and a half. We had to go to court and they awarded us $32,000, which was her down payment. The lawyer cost $5,500 and we split that $2,750 each. So, this $32,000 I would be taking $6,000. Again, I didn't take any funds from the $620,000 sale. She has everything from that and $26,000 from the award. Am I the asshole for telling my sister to stop being weird about our little sister's eagerness with her boyfriend? I don't use Reddit, so my husband made this account for me to post. I, 31F, have two sisters, Claire, 27F, and Anne, 20F. Growing up, I had to take on a motherly role for, and since we don't have a dad and our mother was absent, which in turn made every ex-boyfriend and my now husband also have a type of fatherly role for her, taking her to a father-daughter dance, teaching her how to ride a bike, she wants my husband to walk her down the aisle, etc. Claire is for the first time dating a guy, Roger, for long enough that we got to meet him, and was extremely excited to get a new person in the family, and the first dinner was okay, she was her usual chatty self and she was all over him. My husband even joked he was being replaced. Claire was a bit moody and snarky, but that's just how she is, so I didn't think much about it. The problem started with dinner at my house, and cooked the whole food. She was nervous because she felt he didn't like her much, so she was trying extra hard. She kept telling him that she cooked this and that, she just wanted a compliment on it, and Claire rolled her eyes and snapped with something like, "He gets it, you're very wife material." Later the five of us are drinking wine on the porch and dancing. At some point a certain song started and Anne gasped and cheered up, saying how she tried to teach my husband this dance but he couldn't do it, TikTok dance for what I understood, and asked Roger if he could try it with her. She kinda gets to do it for like 10 seconds before Claire starts yelling and tells Anne to stop being such a whore. She goes on about how Anne's dressed and how she's acting desperate and thinking it's cute to act like that to other people's men. I told her no one is trying to steal her man and she's acting completely insane. Left and we got to talk through the phone the next day. She was ignoring Anne's calls, and she rants about the same things, and I'm again annoyed that she's acting it was malicious on Anne's part. If she had just been annoyed that Anne was being too much, I'd have understood. Like, yeah, Anne is like an overly hyper puppy, so I get it. It'd have been okay for Claire to tell her to back off because not everyone wants to be her friend. But it was the fact that she made it seem like it was something malicious on Anne's part. It felt very disingenuous, especially since Anne is so naive and also has never shown any interest in dating ever. She just got so excited to have someone new, especially older and male, in her life, and it felt wrong that Claire made her feel so self-conscious about it. But also, I get it, it's a girl being eager with your boyfriend and then trying to do TikTok dances with him. I could understand how people might think this is totally weird and inappropriate, but I think someone that's naive enough to downright say, "I'm gonna cook for him because I want him to like me," is not someone that's trying to sneakily steal someone's man. Am I the asshole? Edit. Was asked for info in a handful of comments and I can't believe I didn't mention it. Is in special needs / delayed / diagnosed with something? She was in special needs class growing up and her boss tried to get her tested because he thought they could get a tax reduction with her, but it didn't end up happening. No diagnosis. I'd say it's ADHD and a bit of a low IQ, but I'm not qualified to judge that. Edit. Thank you for the harsh judgment, guys. I've apologized to Claire, which led to a very emotional conversation about our upbringing, which made me apologize for giving in more attention. and had already been apologizing since that night, and now Claire finally responded and apologized too, saying she knew and wasn't flirting with him, she just felt insecure and jealous. The whole conversation with the three of us was very long and emotional, and it was so much more than the dinner, so thank you guys for giving me a reality check. Anne's gonna start therapy. Am I the asshole for not asking my GF if it's okay for guests stop by my house? I, 30M, live with my girlfriend, 28F, in a house I bought this past year. An issue that keeps coming up is that my GF keeps saying I'm letting others invade her privacy by having guests like family members, friends, etc., stop by my house for a brief moment even though I let her know in advance. They're usually there to just pick up a tool I borrowed, give me an item really quick, stuff like that. Sometimes a friend will call and say, "Hey, I'm in your area, do you mind if I come pick up my bike I left at your house?" To which I'll say, "Yeah, sure, no problem." Then I'll let my girlfriend know that my friend is 15 minutes away. She'll get mad because I'm not asking her if it's okay before I agree. I understand planning an event, having guests over for a longer period of time, a get-together, but someone just coming over for a second? I don't feel like I need to ask her permission if it's okay for these types of things, as long as I'm letting her know who and when they'll be coming by. That's a strange conversation to have if I have to let the other person know that I need to check with my girlfriend to see if it's okay before they drop by. No one I know has ever said, "Hey, let me check with my partner before you come over to see if it's okay for something so small." Am I the asshole? TLDR, I, 30M, live with my GF, 28F, in my house. For guests that come to my house for a brief moment, I usually don't ask her if it's okay for them to come by, but I will give her a heads up to let her know so and so will be coming by at X time. She says I should be asking her. Am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for telling my mum I won't be giving my son her last name? Hi Reddit, I'm a 21F who's expecting my first child with my partner of almost 8 years, 20 meters. Our son is due in less than 2 months. For this story to make sense, it requires some backstory. My father isn't in the picture. So my immediate family is me, my mother, and my twin. About 3 years ago my maternal grandmother died. I didn't have a relationship with her, and neither did my mum due to them always fighting. My grandma was quite wealthy, and when she passed away she left me and my twin $500,000 total in a trust that we couldn't access until we were 25. She left my mother nothing. My mother got a lawyer and got money released early from that trust with the condition that me and my twin gave her half of our inheritance each. If we hadn't agreed to give her anything, she would have gotten nothing. Our mum then convinced us to put all the money into a trust of her own for our family exclusively for education and housing, saying it would build stability for future generations. I used this money to get a house that me and my partner currently live in. Since my mum found out I was pregnant, she's been very pushy that we use her last name, which is currently my last name. It's a traditional Scottish name with a capital letter in the middle and a lot of use of the letters M and N. I don't like this last name, it's hard to pronounce from just reading. I also fully intend to take my partner's last name in the future. 3 months ago I told her we wouldn't be using her last name and would be using just my partner's last name. This set her off, calling me petty and ungrateful. I apologized for upsetting her and asked if we could have a conversation about it so I could understand why it upset her. I expressed that I love her and I don't want her to be upset. She refused, saying it was my child and I could do what I wanted. I assumed she had come to terms with it and moved on. Fast forward to last week. I got a text from my mum saying the following: "By the way, I've made changes to the trust. Her last name needs to be your child's surname if you want him to benefit from the trust. I haven't worked this hard for the future to support a partner's last name. That's just the way it is. My last name or bust. I'd rather take the lot and spend it." This upset me. I asked her to give me some time and space to think about what she's done. She then went off at me about how her hard work wouldn't be wasted, even though she herself said it would be set up for future generations like my kids. She wouldn't even have any money to blackmail me with if I hadn't agreed to give her half of my inheritance after her own mother screwed her over. I have gone no contact. But I'm starting to wonder if I'm the asshole for not just using her name to keep her happy in order to make sure my son gets access to that money. I don't want him to miss out just because his grandmother is an entitled piece of work. So Reddit, am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for expecting to be included in boyfriend's daughter's birthday trip? My BF and I have been together for 2 years. We live together. We both have kids that I have mine 24/7. He has his daughter every other weekend. Sometimes his daughter stays with me for all her school break while dad works. When we got together we agreed that we would treat each other's kids as our own. I try to be involved as much as can but try not to overstep as he co-parents with his ex. I haven't met his ex yet. I haven't asked to meet her and neither has she. At this point in our relationship I assume that I'm his family. Yet he keeps me separate from his daughter when it comes to sports, birthday parties, etc. He never invites me, only says, I have this going on for my daughter, and is on his way. I've always respected it, never questioned it, and remained in the background. 3 months ago he mentioned he would work OT or a second job to save up for Disney for his daughter's birthday. He never invited, he only mentioned it. I assumed eventually he'd tell me more and invite me, but he didn't, and I never brought it up. A few weeks later we had a barbecue with friends at our house. One of our friends overheard he had a Disney trip planned for his daughter's birthday without me. She told him he should take me and give me my place as his future wife in his family. I joked and said, he didn't invite me because his ex doesn't want me there, and he avoided the comment. All he said was, it's going to be my ex's first time going to Disney, she's never been there. I let it be, moved on from it. 2 months later he brought it up again. I asked questions like who's all going, etc. He said my daughter, both my parents and my ex is going. I said okay. He brought up again, and this time he mentioned a friend of his ex was going, and that made me feel some type of way, but I let it be out of respect for his daughter. He talked about it again today, said he wants to go fish out there, plans to stay longer with his dad, while his mom, daughter, his ex and ex-friend will come back sooner. I then said, oh, more people going? He said yes, and that his ex's sister and BF will be meeting them up there. I couldn't stay quit any longer and asked him why wasn't I invited, since there seems to be a lot of more people going? And he told me he asked his ex if I could go and she said no. I asked why did she say no, and he said she just said no and she doesn't want to meet you. It hurt my feelings, and I told him it's very messed up for him to exclude me if he wanted me to be there, that his ex should suck it up, and that if he really wanted me there he should have stood up to her and let her know what he wanted. I understand it's his daughter's birthday trip and it's about her, but I just felt excluded from something important in his life that I wanted to be a part of. I guess I was wrong to assume of being included, and now he is mad at me because I made it a big deal and says he won't go. He should still go. All I wanted was to know why he didn't invite me. Now I feel horrible and wondering if I crossed the line. Voicing my feelings, am I the asshole for mentioning my dad's honeymoon location? I'm in my mid-20s and I live with my grandparents, my mother's parents. I was the result of a teenage pregnancy, and my parents have been split up since I left home at 18. My dad is getting remarried in a couple months, and while I don't keep in super close contact with him, the other day I was chatting with him on the phone about wedding-related stuff, and what's happening with his side of the family. That night, I was chatting with my grandparents and mentioned a few of the things we talked about in the conversation, like oh, this aunt moved house, dad's going on a honeymoon to New Zealand. He had specifically said not to mention something about some Christmas plans, which I did not. Today he calls me up in a rage, saying that he's been telling people different locations for his honeymoon to find out how my mom knows things about him, saying she mentioned it in an email to him today. My stance on the issue has always been I won't be in the middle, and if they try I cut off contact for a few months. I told him I didn't know it was supposed to be secret. I chat about normal things that are happening in my life. To the family that I live with. Apparently I'm an adult who should have basic common sense to know that's a secret? Then when I started yelling back at him that he was trying to put me in the middle and divide my whole life up, he proceeded to disinvite me from the wedding and tell me to change my surname, because I've chosen my family. Am I the asshole for telling my husband I'm doing trying to help him lose weight? Edit, done trying to help him, not doing trying to help him. My F31, husband M34, have been together for 7 years, married too. Lately he has expressed disappointment in his weight gain and appearance. He's never been athletic or a big exerciser, but was always slender and lean. Maybe it's genes or age catching up to him, but he's gained about 30 pounds over 2 years, and his physical shows he has high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and vitamin D deficiency. His family also has a history of diabetes and heart disease, which he has been very concerned about since his physical. All these factors brought him to the decision that he needs to lose some weight and get a little more active. A few years ago I dropped 25 pounds and have kept it off. When I saw him struggling to stick to a diet, I offered to develop him a meal program and help him see it through. He's been diagnosed with ADHD and often struggles with planning and impulse control. He seemed excited for the help, but said he felt a little bad having me do extra work. I told him I'd love to help and I got right to work. I calculated his TDE and built a whole meal plan around his calorie goal to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Every weekend for a month I cooked, packed, and labeled every meal for him. It was a large variety of dishes to keep it interesting and delicious. Every day before work I'd pack him breakfast, lunch, and a snack. Dinner was also a meal prep when he got home. I explained to him that if he sticks to what I've made, He will stay within his calorie allowance and see results. Inexplicably, every week at his weigh-in, his weight went up 1 to 2 pounds. We moved his weigh-ins from Mondays to Fridays. I recalculated his TD. I reassessed my calorie calculation on my recipes. He wasn't weightlifting. He promised he was sticking to the meal preps. It didn't make sense why he'd be gaining weight. This morning I reworded my questions a little. I asked him if he was eating anything at work besides the meal preps. He told me after he finishes his meal preps, he'll go to a restaurant near work and get another meal during lunch. He keeps a bag of candy in his desk to eat throughout the day. At night after I've gone to bed, he'll eat 2 to 3 meal preps or make a sandwich with a bowl of cereal. By my calculations, he was eating more than twice his max calorie range. He told me he thought when I said, sticking to the meal preps, that meant eating the entirety of the meal preps and then it wouldn't matter what additional stuff he ate, he'd still lose weight. I was frustrated, but I calmly told him there's no way he could have thought that's what I meant. I told him I'm sympathetic to his ADHD and how it might make this journey difficult, but if it's something he wants, he needs to try. He told me no one asked me to help him, so I told him, that's fair. I'm done trying to help you with this. And things have been weird between us since. TL, dear, I tried to help my husband, DX ADHD, stick to a meal plan to lose weight. He didn't stick to it and said he never asked for help, so I stopped. Am I the asshole for telling GF to go to the doctor? Am I the asshole for telling my girlfriend that she needs to get tested by a doctor in order for her to say, I'm autistic and I have ADHD? She constantly talks about this, and I don't understand how to even have the conversation with her, nor do I understand how to help her, and I'm honestly tired of hearing the same things over and over again about the different reasons as to why she has these conditions without being diagnosed. I am diagnosed ADHD and wouldn't have an issue. I don't have a problem with her being either or both and would be elated to know how I can support this, but what is even going on? Additional disclosure, I put the word soul, I'm autistic and I have ADHD, in quotes because SHE says that, not me you guys. I'm not equating being treated special to the care that ADHD or autism needs. I'm stating a reason someone would refuse treatment but still claim they are autistic/ADHD. Without a valid professional medical degree, you cannot assess that, and if you say that you can or you are doing it, I'm sorry to say, but you're wrong. You're not qualified to make that assessment. Update. Thank you everyone for all the insight and corrections. I appreciate all the opinions and feedback, but my question to everyone is, do you think that I should show her this? Am I the asshole for wanting my husband to confront my MIL for sharing our pregnancy news despite us asking to keep it private? I'm currently pregnant and wanted to keep it on the down low for now. My first pregnancy ended in loss, and this one is a multiples pregnancy, so I've been really anxious and hesitant to share. My husband and I told his mom and other close family early on with the clear request to keep it private until we were ready to tell others. We're only just finishing the first trimester, and recently I received a text from a family acquaintance congratulating us. Turns out they'd run into my MIL that morning and she'd shared the news. This isn't the first time she's gone against our wishes. Around 6 weeks, we learned she'd told an extended family member, even though we had specifically said we weren't ready to make it public and wanted to tell people ourselves when we felt comfortable. I feel hurt and frustrated that she's not respecting our wishes. I made it clear that I wasn't ready for this to be public knowledge, especially given my anxiety surrounding this pregnancy. I think I have a right to decide who I tell and when, especially with something so sensitive. My husband is also frustrated by his mom's actions and understands why this is so upsetting for me. However, he's hesitant to actually confront her about it. He feels that saying something would make her uncomfortable and potentially strain their relationship. He told me that if I feel strongly about it, I should be the one to address it with her directly. I feel like this puts me in an awkward position because I want him to handle it, but he's not willing to, despite knowing how much this is affecting me. Am I the asshole for wanting him to step up and say something rather than having me handle it? Am I the asshole if I tell my friend that she needs to be less clingy and learn to be more independent? I am 16M, and my 2 best friends are my twin sister, who is 16F, who I'll call Katie, and our 16F friend, who I'll call Montana. Don't get me wrong, Montana is a sweetheart, but she's just getting incredibly clingy towards me and Katie, and I'm worried about her. What's playing on my mind is a party we're going to this weekend. It's one of our friends' 18th birthday party, and Katie and I have both been looking forward to it for weeks. Most of our friends are attending, and we haven't seen a few of them in a while because they attend different schools. We were both looking forward to a night of fun and partying with them all. However, the host of the party messaged Katie last night asking if we were planning to bring Montana, to which she replied no. So he went and invited her, and now she's coming to the party. Normally, I'd be more than okay with this, except for the fact that Montana will only know a few people at the party, and she isn't good with large groups of people. She said she was not enthused about there being a lot of people there, so Katie kindly asked her how she planned to cope with that. Montana responded that she could just stick with us too. I was already planning to hang out with my other friends since I spend much less time with them than I do with her. I also have very different friendship dynamics with them. I'm just worried that she's going to cling to either Katie or me the entire time due to her being socially awkward, which she already does regularly. I know if she does do that, I'm well in my right to ask her to give me some space while I'm with my other friends. But at the same time, I'm also afraid of her feeling like I'm abandoning her and getting upset, which has happened before. An example of this is last year's New Year's Eve celebrations. Katie and I were planning to hang out with Montana, just the three of us, but she canceled a few days before. So, Katie and I went and made plans with other people. Then Montana was suddenly able to come along at the last minute, so she came along with us and the group we'd made plans with. When the group wanted to hang out at one of our friends' houses, she stayed behind because she was getting overwhelmed with the whole situation. Montana then got quite upset that we weren't spending time with her, which I understand. I get that she wants to spend time with the two of us. But I also wish she was able to accept that she is not the only person that we spend time with and that we won't drop plans with other friends just for her. I just really want her to be happy, but I also want a social life with other people, which makes me wonderful if I would be the asshole if I expressed how I feel to her. So, would I be the asshole if I were to tell her that she needs to learn to be less clingy and more independent? I'm also really sorry if my English is not the best. Edit. I'm planning on talking to Montana and making it clear that I have other friends I also want to spend time with. I've decided at the party I'm going to introduce Montana to my friends so hopefully she can get to know some of them. I've also worked out that if she starts to get clingy I'll try to talk to her kindly about how I need some space and kindly encourage she makes the effort to talk to and get to know others than just Katie and I. Am I the asshole for making plans to go to my grandparents' house for the holidays instead of going home to dad's? I, 18F, started college a few months ago and I moved out of my dad's house over the summer. Dad assumed that for the holidays and summer I would come back home to stay with him, his wife and my stepsister, 7F. But after thinking it over since September I decided to speak to my grandparents, my dad's parents, and asked if I could spend the holidays with them and they said yes. My dad's upset about this and so is my stepsister. My dad's wife is plain old pissed at me though. I have a reason I decided this. I was 14 when my dad and his wife got married and we moved in together 2 months before the wedding. At that point my stepsister was 3 and we had to share a bedroom until I moved out. If I go back to dad's place I'll be forced to share a room with her again and I don't want that. I resented it when I still lived there and it made things awkward. Since they don't have another room that could double as a bedroom I'd only have that option if I stayed there. Last week my dad mentioned me coming home again and I told him what I'd decided to do instead. He was like, "Why would you do that? This is your home," and I told him I'd be more comfortable at my grandparents' since there's more space for me and a room to myself. He told me my room was still there for me too and I told him a room that I would be sharing with a young kid. My dad's wife was in the background and could hear what we were saying and when dad and I finished talking she called me up and she told me the fact I said a really young kid and not my sister spoke about what this was really about and she told me I couldn't make it any clearer that I want to avoid her daughter and then she told me her daughter would be so upset. A couple of days ago then my dad put my stepsister on the phone and she was asking if I was really not coming to stay and she started to cry and said she'd missed me and wanted to sleep in the room with me again. I told her I was sorry but that couldn't happen. My dad's wife tried to get my grandparents to agree to let my stepsister stay some nights I was there but they said no. The whole thing has become such a shit show. Am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for telling my cousin to stop inviting my ex to family events? I 25F, recently broke up with my long-term boyfriend, 28M, and it's been tough but I'm getting through it. The problem is that my cousin, 24F, and my ex were always friendly, and now she insists on inviting him to family events like holidays and birthday parties. It makes me incredibly uncomfortable, especially because the breakup was a messy one and I'm still healing. I've talked to her multiple times, explaining how it feels awkward for me and asking if she could just keep her interactions with him outside of family events. She claims I'm being controlling and that it's her right to invite anyone she wants and I shouldn't be so sensitive. She's been posting photos with him on social media, and it just feels like she's intentionally making me uncomfortable. The rest of my family agrees with me, but she still insists that I'm overreacting. Am I the asshole for telling her to stop inviting my ex to family events? Am I the asshole for refusing to spend the holidays with my family? This year has been incredibly tough on my 18F family. My dad got seriously ill midway through the year, and he's now bedbound indefinitely. My mom has had to become his full-time caregiver. He's making progress, but it's slow, and I'm grateful he's still here. With all of this, I can already tell that the holidays will be quiet and somber. Last year's Christmas was disappointing. We tried to go out, but my dad didn't feel up for it and stayed in his room. My mom was down, my brothers were glued to their screens, and I ended up ordering takeout and watching Love Actually, alone, again. After my exams this year, all I wanted was a little excitement. A nice outing, a short trip, a get-together, anything. My best friend, 19F, decided to be my saving grace and invited me to her hometown for the holidays. It's 8 hours away by car in a tourist spot I've always wanted to visit, and we plan to meet up with friends and celebrate her 19th birthday. Her family was totally supportive, and I thought it'd be a refreshing break after a hard year. But when I told my mom, she protested. Her reasons ranged from "it's too far" to "who will do your chores?" and finally, "why would you want to spend Christmas with another family?" I get that. It'd feel strange to her, and maybe she'd feel sad if I weren't there. But if I stay, I'll probably spend another holiday alone in my room. I wouldn't go if I thought my family would be genuinely upset by my absence on such a family-centered holiday, but honestly, whether I'm there or not won't make a big difference. We're not that type of family. The trip with my friend is only for a week out of the 2-month holiday before school resumes. I don't plan on going out much, so I'll still be spending plenty of time with my family at home during the rest of the holidays. It's not about avoiding them, I just want to enjoy this time in my life and have a change of scenery, especially after always having mediocre holidays. Am I the asshole? Disclaimer: my mom is a good parent. My parents don't abuse me or make me do excessive chores. My mom's comment about chores and her argument about me going with another family was likely her way of finding a reason to object. My family isn't particularly close. Though we love each other, we're not the type to say it outright, and this becomes more apparent around the holiday season. That said, they still show up for my siblings and me in other ways. I just feel that my mom's arguments are her way of finding an excuse to hold on to me. I understand that late teens can be a challenging time for moms, so I get where she's coming from, but just know that I'm not suggesting she's the AH here, but rather, I'm wondering if I'm being selfish in this situation. Am I the asshole for refusing to give my sister any help in anything ever? I, 16F, have one sister, 15. She has a temper and it makes her mean. When we were younger, it was over stuff that she believed I could do that she couldn't. But there was nothing. She'd say I got to do more extracurriculars than her, but we each had one. I was in a music class after school for 5 years and she did dance. My classes had more breaks than hers did, but we still only had one each. She'd get so mad at me for having more, and sometimes when I'd get back from class when she was on break, I'd come home to her dumping all my stuff all over the room. One time she threw stuff from the top of the stairs when Dad and I were coming in the door, and she broke a lot of toys. I was jealous that Mom and Dad bought her more stuff at Christmas when we were younger. At the time I thought they loved her more, but the stuff all added up to the same amount. I got less because my individual gifts cost more. But when my sister was mean, I'd argue that she got more than me. She'd still say I still got to do more stuff and it wasn't fair. When I was 10, she broke my guitar because she still believed I did more extracurriculars. My parents couldn't afford to replace it back then, and I decided to quit music lessons because I didn't like other instruments as much, except piano, but that was more expensive to learn and we never owned a piano, so practice was impossible. I hated her so much for it, but she would act so smug about it. She rubbed it in my face for years. When I got angry enough, I'd tell her I wish she wasn't my sister and I hated her. She'd say same. I started my period when I was 11 and I have endometriosis, only diagnosed this year, which causes me issues. I bleed a lot and have so much pain. My sister started calling me gross and would tell people at school about how gross I am, and she'd tell people about bleeding accidents I had. This is an ongoing problem and our parents punish her for it, and they try to make us talk our issues out, but it's a waste of time. They discipline me too if I express that I hate her. I try not to say it, but it's not a lie when I say it. I do hate her. And I'm not ashamed of hating the person who tries to make home and school hell for me. There are times my sister has needed help and I ignored it and did nothing. Which came up a couple of days ago because my parents wanted me to tutor my sister in math. She always struggled with math, but now she's failing it and they want me to help her so she doesn't end up failing math all the way through high school. But I refused. I told them I would take them punishing me over helping her. My parents brought up how I never helped my sister and how she might bully me sometimes, but we're sisters and we should love each other, and as the older sister I should try to help when I can. I told them I'd take being punished. They told me I was being so stubborn and they've been mad the last couple of days. Am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for picking up my neighbor's lingerie? So there's this couple who lives across from me, as in our balconies face each other, on the floor above mine. Now ever since they moved in, I've noticed the wife tends to do her laundry typically on the same day, and she has her husband hang it out on their balcony to dry once it's finished. Now I don't know if he's just ignorant or just doesn't care, but he sorta just drapes the clothes over the railing rather than hanging them up properly. What ends up happening is that smaller and thinner pieces of clothing like lingerie, bras and underwear and whatnot end up falling off the railing where the wind then carries them to my balcony. Even so, mistakes happen, so I take any that fell inside, make sure they get properly dried, and hold on to them until I can awkwardly return them the next morning. The wife is obviously embarrassed but thankful towards me for not letting her lingerie get lost. Fast forward many months and this is still happening like clockwork on a weekly basis. Me and the wife are now pretty much on an unofficial schedule that she comes by my apartment to pick up her lingerie the morning after laundry day. It doesn't matter how many times she tells her husband to fix the problem, it never changes. She works during the time they need to be hanged, so she can't do it herself. Now after all of this, I run into her husband one afternoon and he's annoyed at me. He didn't shout, more sharply worded, but he made his point clear. He doesn't like what I've been doing. I shouldn't be touching his wife's lingerie, let alone keeping it overnight in my apartment. According to him, me taking a married woman's intimate clothing is creepy and violating. And if I was really just returning it, I wouldn't keep it overnight and instead come to their apartment late at night to return it immediately. He also spent a while completing that his wife was giving him a hard time for how he was hanging the clothes thanks to me, calling it an asshole move on my part. I don't believe I'm the asshole in this situation. I'm the one making up for his mistakes and returning the lingerie to its owner at my earliest convenience, like a good neighbor should do. I get that it's a very intimate item, but I feel like I'm innocent here. Am I the asshole? Am I the asshole for telling my mom not to invite a racist for Christmas? I, 27F, and my best friend, 27F, have known each other since we were little kids. At this point we're more like sisters than friends. My friend, I'll call her Jessica, grew up never liking sympathy. She grew up with a brilliant single mom, let's call her Allison. She always taught Jessica to never judge a person based on race, sexuality, etc. Last year Jessica went through a really rough time. She lost her dream job and ended a 5-year relationship with her boyfriend, 28M. A few months later she has a fling with this guy, 23M, who we'll call Greg. It started very casual. Greg didn't want anything serious at all. He told friends Jessica was too skinny and too much drama. This stuff got back to Jessica, and although it really upset her, they still would hook up because, again, nothing serious. Jessica told me about all his red flags. He had a son from a previous fling, she hates the idea of being a stepmom, he was part of a dangerous motorbike gang, and worst of all, he had a real problem with black people. She refused to say in detail, but it was stuff she was horrified by. Greg even announced that he didn't care that he was a racist, even wore it proudly. I was shocked and said, "Surely you won't see him again." She explained that it was just sex and she's told him she didn't want to hear any more racist stuff. She comforted me by saying it would likely fizzle out soon. Suddenly, just after Christmas last year, Allison died. She's never been a healthy woman, but it still felt sudden. With Allison gone, my parents and I were the closest to family Jessica had. As she had all of her life, she'd only accept comfort for a short amount of time. Still, I stayed with her that night. Allison wasn't rich, but being the only family, Jessica was set to inherit a lot of money. Greg suddenly became very interested in having a serious relationship with her. Talks of Greg being her boyfriend, of them getting pets together, of them moving in together. Short of having a full-on argument, I've questioned Jessica as to why on earth she was getting serious with this racist. She'd argue that I didn't know him like she did. It's too convenient that this guy suddenly doesn't mind the drama once she inherits a huge sum of money. Traditionally, because it was just Jessica and Allison for years, they'd come for Christmas dinner at my parents' house. My mom decided this year, despite my mistrust and dislike of Greg, to invite him to Christmas. I still have never met him and he's coming on Christmas? I told my mom how against the idea I was. I've been losing sleep worrying, and I ended up in tears at how messed up the whole situation seems. How I feel alone in seeing how this guy is preying on my grieving friend. My mom said he'd uninvite him months ago, but a conversation with Jessica the other week proves she never did. I feel almost gaslit at this point. Greg is clearly not a good man, and we all have to just accept this isn't messed up.
Trust exercises. Mr. and Mrs. Ladbroke had trust issues with one and another. So I have built a trust issues program to help people with trust issues. It's such a great program. and I have helped so many couples and individuals. You know life wouldn't be able to go forward without trust, and civilization itself wouldn't be able to survive without trust. Business and finance is also based on trust, and when trust is lost, you wouldn't be able to do business with them or work with them, and it all goes wrong. Trust is the building block of life, and without it is all lost. When Mr. and Mrs. Ladbrokes came to me as they had lost trust with each other, I knew that I could build their trust back together. The couple didn't believe me at all, but I promised them that I could do it. I'm sure that they found me to become overconfident, but you need to be confident in this job. I remember the first trust exercise, and Mr. and Mrs. Ladbrokes looked at me like I was moss when I first told them. The first trust exercise was for both of them to trust that they wouldn't catch each other. They looked at each other with serious looks. They had to trust each other that they wouldn't catch each other from behind when they let themselves fall. I told them to do it, and they kept refusing. Then the Mr. Ladbrokes decided to gather up the courage and trust that his wife wouldn't catch him. He turned his back towards her, and when he let himself go, his wife didn't catch him. He fell to the ground, and the husband has trusted his wife to do this. Then when Mrs. Ladbrokes took her turn, Mr. Ladbrokes also didn't catch her. They had both trusted each other to do something. They had both confirmed to each other that they trust each other. The next trust exercise was that they had to walk through a rough area, and whoever gets robbed, the other had to run away. So when Mr. and Mrs. Ladbrokes walked through a rough area of my choosing, Mrs. Ladbrokes was held at knife point by another man and wanted her purse. The husband nearly failed, but he eventually ran away, and the wife could trust the husband for a second time. It was now the husband's turn to trust the wife, and the husband trusted his wife to throw porridge and a cake at him, and she did. Then when it was the wife's turn to trust the husband to murder her, the husband couldn't do it. The wife couldn't trust her husband to do something, and their relationship ended. I'm a grown man, and I like to go trick or treating all on my own. I like sweets, and I thought to myself that getting free sweets on Halloween is a positive. Unfortunately, some people look at me with a strange look when they see a grown man at their door without any kids and saying trick or treat. I get it that trick or treating is supposed to be a child's game. Some give me sweets, but you can tell they are having thoughts about me that aren't good. Some just close the doors and tell me off. I don't understand why it's so weird for a grown adult make to go on trick-treating all on my own. I didn't care about what they thought of me, and I kept doing what I enjoy the most. Some really told me about what they were thinking when they saw asking for sweets, and no children of my own to accompany me. To make matters worse, I didn't wear any costume, but I was in my work clothes, as I started trick or treating after work. So I was in office attire, so I wasn't getting much sweets. Really? Then I knocked on one household, and when the guy saw me, a fully grown adult saying trick or treat, he replied to me trick, and he then disappeared right in front of my eyes. The front door was still left open, and there was a terrible smell coming from his house. I stepped, and I could clearly see that hoarding is a problem in this household. Hordes of mess and objects all laid up on one and another. There were skeletal bones laying about, and I thought to myself that I'd better get out. I wasn't really happy about Halloween this year. I was thinking about quitting, until I thought that I should just carry on as the night was young. Then when I knocked on every house after visiting the house full of hoarding, it was always that guy who opened the door. He always said trick instead of sweets, and he always disappeared. Inside the house, I would find someone that was not alive anymore. Then when I knocked on another house, and yet again, I would find that same guy opening the door. I tried begging him not to say trick bit to. Give me some sweets. He always said trick, and he disappeared, which there was someone dead inside the house. A trucker by the name of Luke Jones was driving on a highway alone. There were no other cars and nobody. This highway was basically abandoned, so Luke could just relax and pay attention to the road ahead. Hours later, Luke was still driving when he snuck a peek at his gas gauge. "Oh, fuck, it's almost on E," he said, frustrated. A truck stop sign illuminated in the distance. "Thank God." Luke said he pulled into the truck stop, filled up, got some coffee, then he got back on the road. "Let's put on some tunes," Luke said to himself as he turned the radio dial to on. His favorite station was playing when decided to get some sleep. He pulled off to the side of the road and fell asleep. Luke woke up the next day a little dazed, but got back in the driver's seat of his truck and kept on. Later that evening, as night began to fall, Luke leaned back in his seat and looked at his gas gauge again. What the hell, I just filled this fucker yesterday. How can it already be low again? I haven't even been on the road that long. Luke said, clearly confused about how his truck got as low on fuel as it was already. Luke then jumped out of his truck and began checking the fuel lines and the big metal diesel tank itself. But nothing seemed to be wrong, so Luke just shook it off and pulled off the next exit and into another truck stop and fueled up again. Luke was back on the road, and this time his gauge stayed put. Luke began to relax once more until the truck completely stopped out of nowhere. Luke trembled. What the fuck? He asked himself as he tried to start his truck again, but it wouldn't turn over. Luke was scared out of his mind. No one ever used the road he was on, so he couldn't count on someone rescuing him, plus he had no phone service. So he sat in his truck till morning. The next morning, Luke tried starting his truck again. This time it started with no problems, so he continued his trip. That night, Luke was jamming to his radio when his truck stalled once again. Shit, why the fuck does this keep happening? He shouted. Luke then jumped out of his truck and investigated. He found nothing and no one. Luke then hopped back in his truck and looked ahead, and that's when he saw someone standing there looking at him. The House of Lies by Crazed Frog. The wood floor creaks as the Garway children run through the halls, laughing and jumping. Mr. Garway hugs his wife and smiles to himself, thinking of how all of his hard work paid off. After countless hours of wasting away writing book after book, trying to make it big, he finally did it. His book made a list posted by the New York Times titled Top 25 Most Underrated Books of 2015, finally offering him enough money to buy a beautiful house tucked back in the woods of Massachusetts to encourage his writing and to offer his kids the life he couldn't have growing up in New York City. As they unpack the final boxes, the feeling sets in with everyone. Mrs. Garway feels relieved that they're done. Mr. Garway feels satisfied that his work has passed away, and the two Garway children are excited that they have endless woods to explore as they age. All of them were ignorant to the whispers that traveled from mouth to ear and ear to mouth of the citizens of Richardson, Massachusetts. The Garways were faithful people, good people who gave back to their community. The true, modern-day nuclear family. Mrs. Garway quickly found a new job working as a traveling real estate agent, picking up right where she left off in Boston. Every couple of weeks, Mrs. Garway would pack her bags, kiss the kids on their forehead, and say goodbye to the small town of Richardson to sell a house far beyond the state lines. But while she was away, Mrs. Garway's faithfulness disappeared. Each city she stayed in, night after night, she brought a new man back to the hotel room, trying to fill the sex life she didn't have at home due to Mr. Garway's obsession with writing. After the house was sold, she would go back home and kiss her husband on the mouth with the same lips that were on another man's just the night before. After months of this cycle, Mr. Garway began to question why after 8 p.m. her phone would go dark and why her clothes smelled like cologne when she got back home. Mrs. Garway would shrug it off and say something along the lines of, "Oh, well, it must have just been one of the clients at the open house," or "There must have been a man that stayed in my room before I was there." Her lies echoed through the halls and soaked into the walls, hopefully to be forgotten. But lies aren't forgotten at the house tucked away in the woods of Richardson, Massachusetts. After every one of Mrs. Garway's trips, Mr. Garway's unease built. The scent of cologne clinging onto her clothes would hit him like a train. The unspoken conviction of her actions picked away at his mind more and more. The atmosphere of the home felt like moving through concrete for him. He knew the truth, but could not confront it. That was until her most recent trip, when the smell of cologne was paired with her near constant smiling at her phone. That night, while he helped the children with their multiplication homework, he overheard Mrs. Garway on the phone, her voice low and secretive. "I can't keep doing this," she said, with a nervous chuckle. The sound tightened his chest with pain and sadness. That night, as they were crawling into bed, Mr. Garway stopped and looked deep into her eyes. "I know what you're up to," he said. I am done playing this game of naivety. I could smell him on you the second you walked in the door. Mrs. Garway's face tightened, her mask slipping. You're ridiculous. Stop imagining things, she shot back, but her words sounded hollow, lacking conviction. Bullshit. I can't keep pretending like you're the same women I married, he said with the weight of all of her lies he has been shouldering. Silence hung between them, thick with tension. The walls seemed to shrink in around them, as if they were reacting to the tension. Mr. Garway, between his angry thoughts, could have sworn to feel the floorboards shift underneath him. Mrs. Garway tried to respond, but her voice faltered. She quickly turned her head to hide the swelling tears in her eyes. Stop it. You're being ridiculous, she finally said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Mr. Garway took a step towards her, his face hot with anger and his heart pounding from adrenaline. No! What's ridiculous is that you think I'm supposed to believe that the smell of a new cologne lingers on you whenever you get home from work trips. The lights flickered as they faced each other. I am working hard for this family, she snapped back. I don't have the time for your paranoia. Working hard. Is that what you call sleeping with other men constantly? He snapped. You just think that you know everything, don't you, Sherlock? She snarled back. Just tell me the fucking truth, he yelled. The air in the room became hot and thick, as if it was reacting to their heated accusations. You want the truth? Fine. Maybe if you weren't so tied up trying to chase the high of your one-hit wonder book, I'd feel more attracted to you, she shouted. But no, you just have to be the next Stephen fucking King. So you're admitting it? Just like that? All that we've built, gone just like that, he replied, his voice shaking. No, I just want you to pay attention to me, she replied, her voice softening. He watched as she buried her face in her hands. Guilt flooded over him, because he knew she was right. He had been burying himself in his work and had sacrificed personal relationships because of it. But this guilt did not last. Anger building up, he shouted, I am trying to provide our children the best lives they can have. But before she could respond, a scream echoed from the kitchen. Instantly recognizing that scream as their daughter's, they immediately made a break for the kitchen. Mr. Garway burst through the door first, his heart racing. The room was dim, shadows clinging to the corners, and his eyes quickly scanned for their daughter. He found her crouched on the floor, trembling, staring wide-eyed at the space under the table. What's wrong? What happened? He yelled, the panic in his voice unmistakable. Their daughter pointed a shaking finger toward the wall, where a deep, dark stain had begun to spread, oozing from the cracks. The wall, it's talking, she whimpered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mrs. Garway rushed to her side, kneeling beside her. Sweetheart, it's okay, she said, her voice trembling. What do you mean it's talking? It said my name, their daughter cried, her small body shaking. It said it knows all our secrets. A cold chill swept through the room, and Mr. Garway felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He looked at the wall, the dark stain pulsing ominously, almost as if it were breathing. Stay there, sweetie. Daddy's going to check it out, he replied, voice shaking. He stepped closer to the wall, heart pounding in his chest. As he reached out, the air thickened, a heavy weight pressing down on him. The stain twisted and turned, forming shapes that seemed to mock him. Whispers echoed in his ears, hundreds of voices filling his mind with deceit. Stop it! Get out of my head! He shouted, stumbling back, bumping into the kitchen table. Daddy! His daughter cried as he spun around to look at them. His wife and daughter watched with horrified expressions. Mom? Dad? What's happening down there? Their son's voice cried from upstairs. Panic surged through Mr. Garway. We have to get him, he shouted as he pulled his wife and daughter up and towards the stairs. The house shook around them, the walls seeming to rot away. As they dashed towards the stairs, the walls began to sink, bringing the ceiling slowly down. Get out now, he yelled to his daughter, pushing her towards the front door. Daddy, I'm scared, she sobbed. I'll be okay, sweetie. Get outside and wait for us there, he urged, forcing her towards the door. His daughter hesitated, glancing back at him. But what about you, Daddy? Just go, he shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. The floor shifted beneath his feet. I promise I'll be right behind you. With a final, reluctant nod, she darted out into the night, the cool air washing over her. He turned back to his wife. We need to move, he said, pulling her along as they climbed the stairs, the will to save their son fueling their steps. Darting through the crumbling hallway, they finally reached their son's room. The door handle was hot to the touch, but that didn't stop Mr. Garway. With a swift kick to the door, the resistance gave. Buddy, we need to get out of here right now, he shouted as he ran into the room, lifting him into his arms. He turned to go for the door, but the ceiling had already taken over the hallways. We need to jump out the window, shouted Mrs. Garway, her voice filled with panic as she pointed towards their only escape. I don't want to die, cried their son. Don't worry, buddy, you won't. Not today, Mr. Garway shouted as he ran for the window. The air was thick with desperation, pressing down on them. As the house vibrated ominously, its walls pulsing like a heartbeat. Help me open it, Mr. Garway called to his wife, the urgency in his voice cutting through the panic. Together, they strained against the window. The frame warped and fought back against their might. Come on, Mrs. Garway yelled, her hands trembling, slick with sweat as she pushed against the window. Just a little more. I can feel it, he replied, gritting his teeth as he put all his strength into it, desperate for their escape. It's almost there. With one last heave, the window finally gave way, swinging open to reveal the dark night outside. Fresh air rushed in, but it was tainted with the scent of sweet decay from the house. Mr. Garway quickly set his son down, kneeling to meet his tear-filled eyes. Listen to me, buddy, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. You can do this. Climb out and grab onto that tree. He pointed to the sturdy branches that hung just outside, his only option. But what about you? Their son pleaded, his small voice shaking as tears streamed down his cheeks. I'll be right behind you, Mr. Garway promised, though his heart twisted with uncertainty. You just need to trust me. I'll always come for you. The boy hesitated, his small hands trembling on the windowsill. I don't want to leave you, Dad, he whispered. I know, Mr. Garway said, his own throat tightening as he fought to hold back tears. But we need to be brave. If we stick together, we'll get out of this, I swear. He ruffled his son's hair gently, trying to instill a sense of courage. With a shaky breath, their son nodded. Okay, Dad. I'll go, he said, and with that he climbed up, finding his footing on the windowsill. Good boy, Mr. Garway said. Now, climb down and get to your sister. I'll be right behind you. Mr. Garway turned, making eye contact with his wife. A look of understanding passed between them. Mr. and Mrs. Garway knew that they would not be able to make it out in time, so in their final moments they embraced. I love you, baby, said Mr. Garway. I love you, honey, Mrs. Garway responded as the house enveloped them, forever keeping them trapped within the walls of their beautiful house tucked away in the woods of Richardson, Massachusetts. I was bored one day and decided to head to a small family-owned store that I had heard some friends talking about. I went inside and started searching the aisles for anything that would possibly catch my eye. As I walked down one of the last aisles, I saw a blank cardboard box that caught my attention. I picked it up, and as I did, I confirmed it was just a plain brown cardboard box, except for some writing in a Sharpie on the front, which just read puzzle. I brought it to the counter at the front and asked about it, and the husband and wife at the register had told me that it was left on their porch without a box and was just the pieces, so they put it in a box and wrote puzzle on the box and decided to see if it would sell, and if not, then they would just throw it out. I was intrigued by the mystery puzzle and decided to buy it from them, and they gave it to me for a few bucks. I then went home and started doing the puzzle. As I did, I couldn't find any corner or side pieces anywhere, and just started from some of the pieces that seemed to fit together. I worked on it for about an hour, and it started to just look like a very weirdly plain scene with a few hills and a bright blue sky behind it. If I had to compare it to anything, I'd have to compare it to the window's background. After working on it, I headed to bed, and after a while I fell asleep, and I had a weird dream, and all I remember about the dream was that I was in the puzzle. I was standing upon the hill, and I was looking off into the distance. I then woke up and realized that I was looking at the spot where the person looking at the puzzle would be facing from, as if I was staring at the camera that took the picture. I then went about my day and had a normal day at work and then arrived back home. After settling down for a bit, I sat down and started working on the puzzle again, and as I sat down I realized that on the hill there seemed to be a person standing there. The person was too far away to make out any details, and then I remembered about my dream. I just chalked it up to not paying attention to the puzzle, and that I was just on a sort of autopilot. I then just kept working on it, and as I did, the scenery slowly changed to a more forested area. I worked on it for a little longer, then ate dinner and went to sleep. I then had another dream where I was standing in the same place, but facing the forest this time. This then kept happening. After a few days, I began to see a face in the forest, not only in the puzzle, but also in the dream. I don't know why I didn't stop doing the puzzle, but I almost didn't feel scared by this at all. I kept doing this over and over again, and every day this thing would move. Day after day, he gets closer and closer to the person in the puzzle, but also closer to me in the dream. He wasn't scary. He was actually quite cute. I can't explain what he looks like. He told me not to tell anyone. Today is going to be the day that he gets close enough to give me the hugs that he promised. I'm so excited. I found this on my brother's computer in a file named Personal Diary. There were no more updates after this. Now that I'm looking at the date that this was last open, I realize that only a few days before he was reported missing. There was nothing in his house that had anything connected to a puzzle. No pieces and no box.
I just found my wife outside. I'm sitting here freaking out. It's 3:17 a.m. and I just found my wife outside. This is going to be a mess as I'm still shaking, but let me explain it as best I can. So a bunch of years ago we lived in another house. One night I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard noises coming from the other half of the house. I quietly opened the bedroom door and immediately saw a light on in my wife's study, which was situated next to the kitchen. The house we lived in was a few blocks away from the bad neighborhood, so my immediate thought was that someone had broken in and was going through the stuff in my wife's room, as my wife had come to bed with me several hours prior and as far as I knew, she was still in bed. I crept through the house and was ready to confront the person in the room, when I realized that it was my wife. In my still half-asleep state, I just assumed she was still in bed. Turns out she had woken up, couldn't get back to sleep, and so went to her room to browse Facebook or whatever for a while. I had almost confronted my own wife thinking she was a burglar. Now in our current house we have a screen door and a wooden door. The wooden door has a deadbolt on it, and you have to make sure that you take the house keys with you, because if you close the wooden door, you're not getting back in unless you grab the hidden spare key or knock on the door/window to be let back in. So it's about an hour ago, I'm woken up by the front door rattling. I immediately grab my phone and pull up the security camera located right by the front door. To my surprise, I see my wife standing there, kinda shivering. It's definitely her because we've been married over a decade and I know what my own wife looks like. She's dressed in the same clothing she wore today, a red top and black pants. 100% her. I don't know what she's doing outside, but she is. Confused, I roll over and there's my wife fast asleep. Remembering the incident in our last place, I use my phone screen to shine a light on her and confirm that it's definitely her and she's definitely in the bed. At this point I'm really confused. I get up and make my way through the house to the front door. As I walk into the lounge room, our cat looks up at me, half asleep. Normally she's super curious about stuff going on outside, and I would have thought that hearing the screen door rattling would have caused her to be at the door trying to see what's going on, but it's as if she hasn't heard a thing. I stand by the door and call out, "Who is it?" "It's me, hurry up and let me back in, I'm freezing." I went outside because I heard something but forgot to take the keys in my bag with me. That absolutely sounds like my wife. Accent, intonation, knowledge about where her set of keys are, everything. But I'm not convinced because I've just seen her sleeping in the bed with my own eyes. "Hold on a second," I tell her. Now I'm heading back through the house and into the bedroom. I wake up my wife and say, "This is Really fucking weird, you have to see this. I open the camera app and show her the front door. She's still at the door looking around, wondering what I'm doing because all I need to do to let her back in is turn the handle on the deadbolt and open the door. My wife says, "What the fuck? When was that recorded?" I tell her, "It's not. This is live. You're standing outside by the front door. I just went down there and asked who it was, and your voice told me it was you and that I should let you back in because you're freezing and you left your keys in your bag." My wife gets up and peers through the bedroom window, as you can just see the front door alcove from there. She gasps and pulls the curtains shut. She turns around and I'll never forget the look on her face as long as I live. She's terrified. "That's me," she says. At this point I'm freaked the fuck out. I'm wide awake. I'm speaking to my wife and I'm physically touching her while trying to peer out the window with her, but there she is, standing. Outside in the very outfit she wore today. Same hair, same glasses, same everything. We walk into the lounge room and I grab the big torch I have. It's a big sturdy metal super bright light, great for blinding people and hitting them if they get too close. We stand by the door again. "What's your name?" I ask. She tells me her full name including her middle name. It's correct. "What's your birth date?" She tells me. It's also correct. "What did we have for dinner tonight?" She tells me this too and tells me that I cooked it. This is right too. I can hear my real wife standing next to me trying to control her breathing as she's scared out of her wits. I nudge her and whisper, "Ask her something only you would know." After a moment to steady herself and think of something, she speaks. "When we last stayed with my parents, what change had Dad made to my old room?" There was a pause. "Who is that?" the person outside said. "Why aren't you letting me in? You know it's me. You're starting to freak me out here. Who is that inside with you? Is that a recording of me? What's going on here?" I said, "Answer the question. What change had been made to your room when we last visited?" Another pause, then finally, There was a second bed added as Max and Damien, my brother-in-law's 2 kids, sleep in there while visiting Mom and Dad. There's an audible gasp from my wife next to me. Now we're both freaked out. I grab her hand and lead her back into the bedroom and turn the lights on. We're still awake watching the cameras. The other person walked towards the backyard, presumably to grab the spare key, but that was about 40 minutes ago and I haven't seen them since. I'm too shit scared to go to bed because I'm scared that this person who knew everything about my wife will find the spare key and enter. I don't know who the fuck they really are or what they want, but I'm not sleeping.
So I used to work at an old antique shop in Michigan. It was run by an old lady named Joanna, 74F, and her daughter Sarah, 44F. To give context, Joanna was born in 1950, and in 1975 was when she moved out of her parents' house and into an apartment complex in Traverse City. She lived in that apartment complex for 5 years until the apartment building lost funding, and so everyone had to leave, and the building was demolished around that time Joanna met her husband Dave, 26M. They ended up getting married, and Joanna decided that she wanted to make her own business. Dave supported that, and she said she knew where to start. She went to the old lot where the apartment complex was, and she bought the lot and ended up making an antique shop that was also her house. Ended up living in that antique shop for 30 years, and then they had Sarah. 10 years later, Dave, 36, said to Joanna, 34, that he was going to the bank to take some money out to go pay for the expenses on the building. About 2 hours later, Joanna got a call from the police saying that Dave was killed in a car accident. She was devastated to get the news. She didn't know how to handle it. She thought that she was going to have to shut the business down. But years went by, and when Sarah turned 16, she ended up helping Joanna with the business. Joanna is now 74, and Sarah is 44 years old. Joanna was a real workhorse. Anytime someone said, "What happens if this building shuts down?" she's always said, in a kind of mean demeanor, "This place will never shut down, not on my behalf." So I, 24M, worked at the antique shop for 3 years. We also have another employee, Christy, 19F, was helping us out with the store. Everything was going great until 2 weeks ago. Because Joanna had died from a heart attack in the antique shop in her office, Sarah was in shambles for the day. She didn't come to work. She was dealing with the funeral preparations, and then a couple of days later Sarah said that she was going to close down the store, sell the property, and move to Minnesota. I asked her if she was really doing this, and she said yes. She didn't deal with her parents being gone, so she wanted to try and make a fresh start. We packed up most of the stuff. For about 5 days, we were going to sell it to another antique shop, which then cuts till last night. To give a little context about myself, I have some really bad insomnia. Haven't gotten any sleep in the past 3 days, and it's been really hard for me to sleep. I would still hear my fan running my mom's TV, going the dogs going in and out of the house when they had to pee, so it was really hard. I woke up that morning and was trying to figure out how to get some sleep and see what would happen. Sarah, who was on her way back to Minnesota after looking at a house, texted me at 8 p.m. and the message went like this: Sarah, "Hey, I'm sorry to bother, but I got some bad news me." "What's the bad news, Sarah?" "It's going to take me another 10 hours to get back to Michigan, and Christy is sick with the flu. I still need to get the bottom floor done. I know you said you were trying to get some sleep a couple of days ago, so I was wondering if you could go in during the middle of the night and continue to pack. I pay you double me." "Are you sure you don't have to pay me double? It's fine, Sarah." "No, it's okay. You've been really helpful, and I might as well since this is the last time we'll be seeing each other me." "Okay, I'll be there around there at 10 p.m. Is the key still inside the lantern outside?" "Sarah, yeah, it's still there. Just make sure to put it back when you can. Thank you so much, Dustin." Me, "No problem. I'll see you soon." As I got ready and headed out the door. It took me around 30 minutes to get to the antique store. As I got to the store, I could see there were only a few more things that needed to be packed, so I started packing. I was listening to music while I was at it, just anything to get my mind going as I was packing as I had to finish. Packing. It took me around for hours, which was until 12, and I started feeling tired. Maybe my insomnia was finally starting to subside, so I thought maybe I shouldn't heading be home. I'm tired. So I decided maybe I'd just fall asleep at the antique store. I didn't want to go into Joanne's room because it was already pretty much packed up, and there was nothing up there. So I found an air mattress in the storage room, and I decided to pump it and fall asleep there. As I was continuing to pump the air mattress, I heard a loud thud. Coming from upstairs, I know that no one else was in the building, so I went up there. As I walked to the stairs and opened the door, one of the boxes was tipped over, and everything had fallen out of it. The window was open, so I'm guessing the wind blowing over. So I ended up picking the box back up and putting stuff back in it. As I put the box back in place, it was the door slammed behind me again, thinking that maybe it was a wind. As I went to open it, it wouldn't budge. Every time I turned the knob, it wouldn't open. And then I heard a phone ringing. There was a phone on the desk in Joanna's room, but the phone wasn't plugged in, so how could it be ringing? I started to think I was losing my mind, so it up, and I heard the voice was saying, "You never should have come back here." I responded, "What do you mean, and who is this?" The voice replied, saying, "You think you can take from me everything I worked for? You're just going to take it all away. I'm not going to allow you to do that." I started to realize that it was Joanna's voice. I started to think that I was going crazy. How could she be calling me? The phone hung up. I didn't know what to do, so I ran back to the door and tried to get out, but I couldn't, and I heard a voice from behind me saying, "You're not going anywhere." As I turned around, I saw a dark shadow silhouette behind me with bright red eyes, staring at me. I kept trying to kick the door open. It was getting closer and closer until eventually the door fell off its hinges as my foot was being pushed forward. I missed a step and fell down the stairs, sprayed my ankle in the process. I got up and hobbled my way out of the store, into my car, and drove far enough, driving to the nearest hospital to check up on my leg. It was really bad. They told me I needed to stay here for the rest of the night. They could tell that I was visibly tired. So they took me to one of the rooms. They put a brace on my leg, and I was able to sleep that night. Once I woke up, I kept on thinking, what is that real? Was all that real, or was that my imagination from being so sleep-deprived? It was around 6 a.m., and that's when Sarah called me and asked me if someone had broken into the store. I said no. I said I was going to be there soon because we needed to talk. The ER was able to let me out, so I went back to the antique store. As I got there, Sarah waiting for me. Outside, as I got there, Sarah asked me what happened. So I took her upstairs and told her everything that happened, and she didn't believe me. She thought I was going crazy. I said, I don't know if I'm going crazy, but all I know is that whatever happened, happened, and I don't know. Sarah told me to take a breath. Maybe your brain was messing with you that night. Okay, but listen, go home and rest, okay? Christy told me that she's feeling better, so she's going to come and help me pack everything up and put it in the truck. So just go home and get some sleep, okay? I said sure, and then went home. I ended up falling asleep for about an hour, and then I got a call from Christy. Christy was crying profusely. I said what was going on and what happened. Christy said Sarah had hung herself in Joanna's room. Christy said she called the cops and the ambulances as fast as she could, but she was already dead by the time they got there. I said, how did this happen? Christy said she didn't know. The only thing she saw in there was the phone on the table, but the phone was hanging from the cord on the ground. I know what happened. Joanna killed her. Maybe she possessed Sarah and hung her, and I kept thinking to myself, was I supposed to die that night? Was Joanna supposed to kill me?
There's a death row inmate who we've executed over a dozen times. He won't stay dead. We killed Joseph Glass for the first time on August 18, 1999. I knew he was a strange case since day one. Never seen a guy so happy to die before. It was like we were doing him a favor. He refused the automatic appeal. He refused to be seen by a chaplain. He just wanted it over with. It had only taken a little over a year, and it was already time for him to make his appointment with God. He freaked me out just passing by his cell. He was like our very own Hannibal Lecter, the way he just stood there in the back of his cell like he'd been waiting for you. The lights always burned out in any cell he was in, and maintenance had gotten tired of fixing them. Not that he seemed to mind in the slightest. The darkness seemed to swallow his top half, and all I could see were the whites of his beady little eyes poking out of all that black. Billy drummed his baton against the bars. Up and at him, cowpoke, he called in that mocking tone. Time finally come for you to pay what you owe, you sick son of a, Billy. Warden Taft silenced him with a word. If you can't act like a professional, you're going to have to sit this one out. Billy paused, and licked his chapped lips. Nah, he muttered. This a show I can't miss. Glass seemed to tick Billy off more than any prisoner before him. He liked them to at least pretend to feel sorry for what they've done, or act scared of what's coming to him. This one didn't even have the common decency to shed a tear. He was as stone-faced as a statue, even while being marched to the chair. Billy liked to joke sometimes that we ought to take the guy out back with some car batteries and really put the fear of God into him, get him to cut out that stoic act. I think he was only half joking. After what this guy did to those girls, well, Billy has a daughter, so I guess it struck a chord. We all watched him fry. The warden, his closest men. The thin-faced man representing the commissioner of corrections. The prison physician. The families of those poor girls. It couldn't have gone more by the book. Only oddity I'd noticed at the time was that the stench of death never quite left the clothes I'd worn that day. And then the next morning, we came into work to see the whites of those beady little eyes staring at us from the darkness again. Good morning, sirs, he said, just as he did every morning in that airy, hoarse little voice. I'll admit it. I dropped everything I was carrying, stumbled back, stammered like a confused child. Hell, I almost screamed. You're not, why you're supposed to be, I don't know what you mean, sir. He leaned in like he was trying to stare a hole through my chest. His tone almost sounded disappointed. You never came for me. You promised me that yesterday would be the end, sir, but you never came. I waited all night long. Why did you lie to me? Me and Taft looked at each other. We both had the exact same question on our minds. If Glass was still alive, who the hell did we roll into the morgue last night? Jesus Christ. Taft gagged when he pulled back the cadaver cover, stumbling away. It's Billy. I looked. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. And I'll be forever haunted by the sight of my friend lying there on his back, mouth agape and cloudy eyes staring into the ceiling, open wide as if he'd spent his last moments in a state of terror. The public never found out what happened. The cover-up story was that poor Billy had been taken by cardiac arrest. Internally, it was the scandal to end all scandals. Worst case of incompetence and negligence in history, they called it. They brought the hammer down on anyone even tangentially involved. Me and Taft were out on our ears, and they would have prosecuted us too, but that would have required admitting it ever happened. But I just could never wrap my head around it. Of those dozens of witnesses, not a single person noticed we were strapping a guard to the chair, not an inmate. It was impossible to the point of absurdity. Glass had been the man in that chair. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Some months later, I noticed power flickering off all over the city one evening. It was brief, so I thought nothing of it, at least until I got a call from a familiar number the very next morning. I understand you were one of the staff who regularly worked with one Joseph Glass. We would like to consult with you about an evolving situation. Oh. At 7 p.m. yesterday, we attempted the execution of Joseph Glass for the second time. There was a long pause, and when the voice returned, the professionalism had melted away, replaced with a baffled anxiety. And well, it didn't work. I blinked. It didn't what? There came a long sigh. Perhaps it'd be best if you saw for yourself. And just like that, me and Taft had our jobs back. Officially, Joseph Glass had been successfully executed on August 18, 1999. Unofficially, they tried again 6 months later, just to tie up loose ends. This time, he hadn't even had the courtesy to pretend to die. He just sat there on the chair, motionless and unaffected, while the CO who'd flipped the switch suddenly seized up and began to convulse, screaming and gnashing and wailing as electricity seared him beneath. His skin, clawing at his chest until his eyes popped in his skull and rolled down his face like melted candle wax. All around him, lights flickering, machines bursting from pressure, electrical panels vomiting arcs of static. Was a mess. The feds were crawling all over this case now from a department I've never heard of. Something about investigating preternatural activity. They told me Glass was refusing to speak with anybody but the COs who'd once cared for him. Being walked into that interrogation room almost made me feel like I, myself, was a convict being marched to his execution. Glass was staring at me when I walked in, like he'd been sat there, motionless, waiting for me. I expected nothing less. I took a shuddering breath as I sat across from him. I'd sat across from serial killers and psychos before and showed no hint of fear. But how could I not, now, sitting across from a man who can kill people without touching them? Glass. Officer Mendez. His tone betrayed no emotion. I had thought you'd abandoned me. I winced. No. No, Glass, I'd just been temporarily relieved. It's good to see you again. Would you like a glass of water? I offered it to him. He didn't even look at it. His eyes just bored into mine, relentless. I'm here to ask you a few questions. Silence. Okay. Glass, I need to know how you killed Billy and Kramer. I didn't, he replied. It did. The thing standing behind you. I didn't bother to turn around. I had enough experience with prisoners trying to trick me into looking the other way while they pulled off some half-baked escape plan. Glass, please, let's take this seriously, I replied. I've always treated you with respect, haven't I? You've never had any problems with me. Actually, I do. I have a problem with all of you. Oh. You here all believe that death is a punishment. There was the first hint of emotion I'd ever heard in his voice. It's not. It's freedom, the only freedom. You promised me that gift. You promised me you'd let me die. You've given it to so many other prisoners while leaving me behind. With all of your machines and your science and your knowledge, surely you can find a way if anyone. My throat felt suddenly dry. Had to take a sip of the water myself and hoped it would quell my burning nerves. We're trying our best, Glass. But you have to work with us. It may help if you told us what exactly is preventing us from executing you. He moved for the first time, leaning in so slow as to be almost imperceptible. It won't let me die. And that's when I felt a hand settle on my shoulder from behind. Everything stopped. My lungs stopped inflating. I swear my heart stopped beating and my blood froze in place in my veins, and it all felt so cold. I could see the hand in the corner of my eyes, long and veiny and black. I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I'd once mocked the way deers froze in headlights. Now I understood. I couldn't move, I couldn't blink, I couldn't think. I couldn't even take a single breath. Even as my lungs began to cry out for air, and my vision blurred, and my thoughts melded together. All I could see was Joseph's eyes staring into mine. Those infinite fathoms of darkness, that Stygian sea that swirled and stormed and thundered in the blackness of his iris, and the eyes of things waiting a million leagues below the waters. And I would have suffocated there, too terrified to even breathe, if those agents in black had not called off the interrogation then and come storming into the room. Later they showed me the tapes from the security camera. There'd been nothing behind me. Nothing placing its thin hand upon my shoulder. Nothing at all. On May 7, 2001, Glass was set to be executed for the third time, via hanging or so I heard, in some government black site somewhere far from prying eyes. While it was set to happen, me and Taft were sharing glasses of scotch in his office, nominally to celebrate. Really because we were scared. Taft always struck me as young at heart despite his years, but this was the first time the warden had ever looked truly, properly old. He watched the yard below as he had a drink. Did I ever tell you why I chose this line of work, Mendez? I shook my head and he sighed. Back in '63, they found a woman's body in the back seat of a burnt-out car in some state park near my neighborhood. A prostitute. One of her Johns had chopped her up, burned all the evidence. And you know what got me, Mendez? Nobody cared. Nobody bothered to investigate. Who will notice one less hooker on the corner of Fifth Avenue, right? It didn't sit right with me. The way I see it, Mendez, every life matters. Even the ones we try and cast aside. Everybody's got people who love them and childhood memories and all that. Everybody deserves justice. No matter who they were. He set down his glass and looked me in the eyes. So I joined the force. Got the case reopened. Found the guy. And I watched him fry. And I like to imagine she was there watching too as he burned. There was a tense moment. And then a chuckle. Course, after that bullet to the hip in 71, I couldn't walk the beat anymore. But I've been just as happy here. Watching justice be served, it makes me feel like there's some kind of karmic order to the world. Good deeds and bad deeds get repaid in kind. It was clear there was something. Lurking beneath his words, some unspoken thesis. Eventually, with old, wrinkled, tired eyes, he said it. I've thought about it, and if Glass doesn't die tonight, I'm finally going to retire, Mendez, he confessed. After what he did to those girls, what kind of order can there be in a world where a monster like that is just beyond justice? I was shocked. Warden Taft always struck me as an unmoving fixture. What would we do without him? He'll die, sir, I promised. It'll work this time. It has to. But he seemed deeply uncertain. With one last shuddering drink, he leaned forward. His eyes. He stared at my expression as if desperate for me to understand, for me to know. Those things, in his eyes. Haven't you seen them? And at that moment, Taft was yanked up out of his chair. It was so sudden, so inexplicable, I could barely register what I was witnessing. Some unseen force lifted him 2 or 3 feet above the ground, dangling him there. He choked, coughed and sputtered, desperate to gasp down air which would not come, and clawed at something around his neck which I could not see. He was hanging, I realized. And with wide, horrified eyes, the same as Billy's had been, he silently begged me for help. I sprang from my chair and wrapped my arms around his dangling legs. At first I tried to pull him down to the floor, but I realized it was only tightening the invisible noose around his neck. Then I tried lifting him as high as I could, which gave him some relief but not much. Tears rolled down his face as it swelled and turned blue, and even though I could not see the noose, I could see the bruised purple skin where it had squeezed around his neck. All the while I screamed myself hoarse. Help. Somebody please. Jesus Christ, we need help in here. But nobody came. And all of a sudden, some unseen force seemed to sweep my feet out from under me. I dropped like a bag of bricks, but I was so startled I maintained my grip around the warden's legs. I fell and yanked him down with me, and his body suddenly jolted with a sickening crack. It took me a while to manage the courage to look up at him. His neck had been stretched far too long, and his head was bent to the side at almost a 90-degree angle. Eyes wide, round and bloated, tongue hanging from dry lips. And then whatever force had suspended him disappeared, and his body fell upon me while I screamed and screamed. I came bursting from his office to find my co-workers casually chatting and working just outside. Somehow, despite all my screaming and begging while Taft was dying, none of them had heard a thing. I took a page from Taft. I wanted out. We were dealing with something unholy here, something whose tendrils could reach any distance, and my life, who knows, maybe even my soul, was at hazard. But the agents in the sharp suits made one thing clear. If I refused to cooperate, well, I would make the perfect scapegoat for the murder of Warden Taft. I was marched into the interrogation room to find a Joseph Glass that had abandoned all pretense of humanity. His eyes had darkened to a pure black. Or perhaps he had no eyes at all, only windows into some place of outer darkness. I was shaking like a leaf as I sat in front of him, feeling more like a prisoner than he was. Mr. Glass. No reply. I shuddered, trying to focus on my little piece of paper to distract myself from the blackness of his eyes. I have some questions I'm supposed to ask you. Is that okay? Silence. I take a deep breath. How old are you, Glass? I thought it was just one of those basic questions. Conversation starters, really. I couldn't have prepared myself for his answer. I am old, child. His voice was nothing like I remembered. It was deep and low and rumbling, like there were multiple people speaking in unison, and all were equally ancient. Older than you could possibly know. Older than this nation, and older even than the empire that once bore it. I had to fight the basic animal instinct to flee. Focus on the questions, I thought. Why did you do what you did to those girls? Just so I could feel something again, he whispered. Anything. Did you not feel the slightest bit of guilt? Remorse? You ask that of me? Me who has watched empires rise and fall. He almost sounded amused. Does time feel remorse? for time has killed far more than I. But mankind is like the Hydra. All I've killed will be replaced by, essentially, identical stock and in greater numbers. And then they will die and be replaced. And so the cycle will continue forever. Did you expect me to pity them for being given the death I, myself, covet? Only the dead are given leave of the cycle. It is a blessing. And suddenly he stood from his chair as if he'd never been restrained at all. A blessing you promised me, Officer Mendez? I stared up at him in disbelief. What? How did you? But I couldn't even stammer a sentence out before he was upon me, crawling over the table with the eerie grace of a spider. These were no longer the imperceptible hints of emotions I'd come to expect. It was like a switch had been flipped. Tears streamed down his cheeks, snarling with genuine rage, hurt, betrayal. And beneath those black seas in his eyes, all the things that haunted the fathoms below were rising to the surface. You owe me a death. Make good on your word. Pay your debt. I cried out and recoiled from his every touch with disgust, but he was stronger than he looked. I couldn't worm my way out of his impossible grip. I won't. Get off of me, you sick bastard. Do it. Pay me what you owe. It was like 1,000 different voices screaming in my ear. Straining and weeping, I locked my hands around his neck and pressed my thumbs against his throat, trying to strangle him. But instead, I could just feel that grip upon my own neck, squeezing the life out of myself as my lungs burned for air. Yet I kept pressing harder and harder, as if hoping I might somehow break through whatever unholy force was protecting him. And then those terrible hands grasped my shoulders again, and I was paralyzed by a terror that could be called nothing but ancient and primal. Like the thing standing behind me was the same force that had kept my ancestors huddled terrified in their caves 100,000 years ago, and every one of those voices was crying out to me through my very blood. And it pulled me from my chair, threw me as though I were weightless. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the infirmary. Once more, none of this was captured on the security camera. In the footage, I just enter the room and have a seat with strange, almost robotic movements. And then the both us just sit there, staring at each other without speaking, without moving, without blinking. For an hour. After this, Joseph Glass entered a catatonic state, and from then on refused to converse with even me. Now that my usefulness had ended, the agents discarded me like yesterday's trash. Don't even seem to care if I tell anybody. Who would believe me? I thought I'd gotten lucky. That my nightmare was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Go sorting through any public records and you won't find a single mention of the name Joseph Glass. They've squirreled him away in that off-the-books black site and scrubbed away every other trace of him. I'd say he'd been unpersoned, if indeed he could ever be called a person at all. But they're still trying every execution method in the book. I don't know quite why. Maybe it's for research. I'm sure the US military would love to find the secret to making its men as unkillable as Glass. And besides, they're not the ones who have to deal with the consequences. On June 3, 2005, they tried a firing squad. I know this because me and my wife were out on our second honeymoon, slow dancing by the lake at night to our favorite song, when I felt a wetness against my chest. I looked down to see her eyes as gray and dull as foggy glass, and her chest shredded to Swiss cheese by rounds that made no sound. On December 23, 2012, they tried lethal injection. That was the day they found my son's car wrapped around a tree, and baffled coroners discovered that he was dead before the accident even occurred, his bloodstream polluted with pavulon and potassium chloride. It's been years since I've isolated myself from everyone I knew, hermiting away in this cabin out in the middle of nowhere, and yet the stench of death still follows me. Just a couple years ago, I found a news report mentioning my nephew. Apparently, he'd been found completely exsanguinated, his veins emptied utterly despite no signs of a struggle. God knows what kind of arcane methods of execution they're trying by now. He's not going to let me walk away from this. Not while I still owe him a debt. But I've been doing some research too. Research into those untold legions of things I witnessed staring up from that blackened sea in Glass's eyes. I've learned things men were not meant to know. Practiced rites, assembled tools, ingredients. And I think I know where they're keeping him. Even though they blindfolded me, I counted the second between every turn on our way to the black site, and I've since spent weeks watching the place, cataloging every entry point. Maybe I'm slipping into madness. Or maybe I've truly found the way to put an end to the horror. To finally give this monster the justice that Taft would have wanted for him. Joseph Glass had been right about one single thing: I have to pay what I owe. Even if it kills me.